Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The road to Raven's Hollow was a winding, desolate stretch of cracked asphalt, swallowed at the edges by gnarled trees. Elena Carter tightened her grip on the steering wheel as her car lurched over a pothole, her headlights carving thin beams of light through the encroaching fog. Her brother had been here. 3 weeks ago, Noah had called her from an unknown number. His voice was low, urgent. "Elle, if anything happens, I need you to find me. Raven's Hollow. But don't." The line had gone dead. Elena had spent days trying to track him down, calling hospitals, filing missing person reports, scouring his social media. Nothing. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. But then, an envelope had arrived at her apartment. No return address, just her name scrawled in shaky black ink. Inside was a single photograph. Noah, standing in front of an old wooden house, its shutters sagging, its roof eaten away by time. On the back, written in the same unsteady handwriting, "Find me before it starts." Now, here she was in a town that barely existed on a map, chasing a ghost. The Welcome to Raven's Hollow sign was riddled with rust, half its letters obscured by creeping vines. Beneath it, someone had scratched something into the wood, a single word deep and jagged. "Run." A chill crawled up Elena's spine. She forced a breath and kept driving. The town appeared suddenly, as if it had been waiting for her. Dimly lit buildings huddled together, their rooftops sloping like crooked teeth. Gaslight-style lamps lined the streets, their flames flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. People were outside. They stood in loose clusters, their faces turned toward her car as she rolled through the main street. They didn't wave, didn't smile, just stared. Their eyes were shadowed hollows, their skin taut and pale, as if they'd been stretched too thin. Elena pulled into a gas station, if you could call it that. A single, rusted pump leaned under a sagging awning. The word closed taped haphazardly across the door. She killed the engine, the silence pressing in thick and heavy. A man stood nearby, watching her. He was tall, his clothes a size too large for his frame. His hands twitched at his sides, fingers flexing and curling like he was testing them out. His lips pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Elena," he said. She went rigid. "How do you know my name?" The man cocked his head, considering her. "It's starting." A sharp itch prickled at the base of her neck. She fought the urge to scratch. Before she could demand an answer, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the swirling fog. Elena swallowed hard. Her pulse thundered in her ears. From somewhere deeper in the town, a bell tolled. Long, low, shivering through the night air. And suddenly, all at once, the people turned and walked inside. Doors slammed. Curtains snapped shut. The streets emptied in the span of seconds, leaving Elena alone in the eerie hush. The itch at her neck spread, burrowing beneath her skin. A single thought echoed through her head. "Find Noah, before it's too late." The silence was suffocating. Elena stood by her car, staring down the empty street. It was as if the entire town had been swallowed whole the moment the bell rang. A cold wind slithered through the alleyways, carrying with it a scent she couldn't quite place. Wet earth, something metallic, something wrong. She forced herself to move. Noah had been here. That was the only thing that mattered. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and walked toward the one building that still had its lights on, the Hollow Inn. The wooden sign creaked as it swayed in the breeze, its paint peeling. Up close, she could see claw-like gouges in the wood beneath the letters, as if something had scraped against it. She hesitated before pushing the door open. A brass bell jingled overhead. The inn's lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something faintly medicinal, like antiseptic. A woman stood behind the counter, her eyes flicking up as Elena entered. She was older, her skin pale and strangely smooth, like wax. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to speak, but then she hesitated, as though she'd forgotten how. Finally, she said, "You shouldn't have come." Elena stiffened. "I'm looking for my brother, Noah Carter. He was here a few weeks ago." The woman's fingers tapped against the wooden counter, a rhythmic, jittery sound. "There's no one here by that name." Elena stepped forward, pulling the photograph from her pocket. She slapped it onto the counter. "Then explain this." The woman's eyes flicked down. Her face remained unreadable, but something shifted behind her expression. Elena saw it, a flicker of recognition, a hint of fear. The woman reached for the photo, but her hands were trembling. Elena watched as she quickly pulled them back, curling her fingers into her palms. The itch on Elena's neck worsened. The woman swallowed. "You should leave before," ding. The sound came from the far end of the lobby. Elena turned her head. An old elevator stood there, its rusted doors slightly ajar. Inside, dim light flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. And sitting in the center of the elevator floor, untouched by dust or decay, was a single object. A black leather notebook. Elena's stomach twisted. It was Noah's. She rushed toward it, barely noticing the way the innkeeper let out a strangled noise, half warning, half plea. Elena snatched up the notebook and flipped it open. Pages were torn, words scribbled frantically. She scanned the text, her pulse hammering. "It's inside me. I can feel it, scratching, tearing, trying to get out. They lied. This isn't a town. It's a cage. If she finds this, Elena, run." The itch on her neck deepened, burning like fire. And then she heard it, a wet, papery sound, like skin peeling away. Elena turned. The innkeeper was staring at her, her eyes glassy and wide. And beneath her chin, along the pale column of her throat, her skin was splitting open. Elena froze. The innkeeper's throat quivered, the split widening. A dark, wet seam opened along her jawline, stretching downward like something beneath her skin was pushing its way out. A thick, slick membrane glistened under the ragged tear. The woman didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She just watched. Elena took a slow step back, clutching Noah's notebook to her chest. The woman's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You need to leave," she whispered, her voice thick, warbling, like she was speaking through water. "Before it happens to you." Elena's breath hitched. "What the hell is?" The woman shuddered violently. With a sickening rip, the skin along her throat peeled further, exposing raw flesh that pulsed shifted. Her hands trembled as she clutched the counter, as if holding herself together. She locked eyes with Elena, her pupils blown wide. "Run!" Elena did. She turned and bolted, shoving through the inn's front door and into the freezing night. The wooden sign above groaned on its rusted chains as she stumbled onto the empty street. Her breath came in frantic gasps. The itch on her neck was unbearable now, searing beneath her skin like tiny hooks dragging through her nerves. She clawed at it, wincing as something shifted beneath her fingertips, like a layer of skin was loose. No! She wasn't sick. She wasn't one of them. She had to find Noah. Elena forced herself to focus, her mind racing. The Marrow House. That was where the townspeople took those who changed too soon. Noah's journal had mentioned it. She turned down a side street, her boots crunching against damp gravel. The buildings loomed above her, their windows dark. The whole town had sealed itself away, as if waiting for something. The bell tolled again, low and heavy, vibrating through the air. A shadow shifted ahead. Elena jerked to a stop, her heart slamming against her ribs. A figure stood at the far end of the street. Tall, unmoving, watching. Its arms were too long. The dim gaslight flickered, casting rippling shadows across its wrong shape. The figure tilted its head in an unnatural, jerking motion. Elena's throat closed. Then, into silence, she heard it. A wet, papery sound, like skin peeling away. The figure took a step toward her. Elena turned and ran. Her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as she sprinted down the empty streets, Noah's notebook clutched in her shaking hands. The air felt thicker, the very town pressing in around her like a living thing. Behind her, The sound of peeling skin followed. The figure was moving, not running, not walking, dragging itself forward, its elongated limbs shifting unnaturally in the dim light. Elena's legs burned, but she didn't slow down. She had one destination, the Marrow House. Noah's notebook mentioned it more than once. They take them there when it starts, when the skin doesn't hold anymore. She had no idea what she would find there, but she knew, deep in her gut, that Noah had been taken inside. The streets twisted, the town's layout making less sense the deeper she ran. Every turn felt wrong, like the buildings were shifting when she wasn't looking. The fog had thickened, turning the streetlights into smudges of orange glow. Then suddenly, it was in front of her, a massive, decaying house, hunched at the end of the street like a dying animal. The Marrow House. The windows were black, the wooden siding warped and curling like something had been trying to push its way out. The front door was slightly open, a sliver of darkness beyond. Elena hesitated. Then she heard a voice, a whisper. Elena. She went still. It was Noah's voice, coming from inside the house. Her pulse pounded. Every instinct screamed at her to turn and run, but she forced herself to move, stepping onto the warped wooden porch. The boards groaned beneath her weight. She pushed the door open. Darkness swallowed her whole. Inside, the air was damp, filled with the heavy scent of rot and something sour. A long hallway stretched before her, lined with doors, each one slightly open, revealing nothing but deeper blackness inside. The voice came again. Noah, she whispered. Elle, please. It was coming from below. A basement. Elena moved forward, gripping the banister as she made her way down a staircase that felt too soft, like the wood had been soaked through. At the bottom, a single, dim bulb swung from the ceiling, and in the center of the room was a figure, crouched, hunched over something. It was Noah. Her breath caught. No. He flinched at the sound of her voice, his body convulsing. Elena, don't. Look at me. She stepped closer. Then she saw the piles of skin around him, discarded, split open husks, wrinkled and empty. And Noah, his skin was peeling away in long, wet ribbons. Elena's stomach lurched. He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the new layer forming underneath. His voice came in a whisper. It's inside me. Something moved beneath his flesh. And behind her, the basement door slammed shut. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The door had shut on its own. The bulb overhead swung wildly, throwing shadows across the damp walls. The room stank, raw and metallic, like something freshly torn open. Noah sat hunched in the center of the basement, his body trembling, his arms wrapped around himself. But it wasn't just him anymore. His skin, his real skin, was sloughing off in wet, curling layers, peeling at the edges like old wallpaper. Beneath it, something shiny, raw, and shifting pushed through. He was molting. Elena's stomach lurched. No, she whispered. What's happening to you? Noah let out a wet, shuddering gasp. His fingers twitched violently as he dug them into his arms, trying to hold himself together. It won't stop, he rasped. His voice was different, strained deeper. Wrong. She took a step forward. Who did this to you? His breath came in sharp, painful bursts. It's not them. It's inside me. Elena's pulse pounded. Inside you. He twitched, his spine jerking unnaturally. I tried to stop it. I thought if I could just crack. Noah convulsed. His back arched violently, his head snapping back at an unnatural angle. His skin ripped further, exposing something pale and smooth underneath. Elena staggered back. A whispering sound filled the basement, like flesh uncoiling. Noah's mouth opened too wide. His jaw stretched past its natural limit, and from deep within his throat, something shifted. Something tried to crawl free. Elena. His voice was barely human. And then he lunged. Elena barely had time to react before he collided into her, knocking her backwards. They hit the cold basement floor, and his fingers dug into her arms. But they weren't fingers anymore. They were longer, sharper, curling outward like new limbs unfurling from beneath the old. His skin was coming off in sheets like it was never meant to stay on. Elena screamed. She kicked hard, throwing him off. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, his body convulsing. For a split second, he looked up at her, the last piece of her real brother still inside those changing eyes. "Elle," he choked. "Please." Then his entire body spasmed. His skin split down the middle, peeling away in one last terrible tear. And something else crawled out. Something that had been wearing her brother like a suit. Elena couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. The thing that had been Noah rose to its full height, its new limbs stretching, testing the air. And then it turned its head toward her and smiled. The thing in front of her wasn't her brother anymore. Elena's breath came in short, shallow gasps as she stared at the thing that had been Noah. It was tall, its limbs stretching unnaturally as if adjusting to their new form. The last shreds of Noah's skin hung from its body in wet, curling ribbons, slipping off like a discarded cocoon. The dim basement light flickered, illuminating what was beneath. Its flesh was smooth and pale, almost translucent like something half-formed. Its joints bent in the wrong places, and its ribs, too many ribs, shifted beneath its skin. And its face. It still had Noah's eye, but the rest of it was changing. The bones of his face stretched and cracked, his mouth twisting into a too-wide grin, his lips splitting at the corners. "Elena." The voice was still Noah's, but there was something else inside it now, layered beneath like an echo, something that wasn't human. She took a step back, her legs trembling. "Noah," she whispered, even though she knew. She knew it wasn't him anymore. The thing took a step forward. Its new limbs moved awkwardly at first, but then it adjusted, learning how to use them. "Elena," it said again, tilting its head too far to the side. "Why do you look so scared?" Its lips curled back, exposing rows of new, growing teeth. Something inside her snapped. She ran. She bolted up the basement stairs, slamming her shoulder into the door, only to find it wouldn't budge. It was locked. "Elena." The voice was closer. She turned. The thing was crawling up the stairs toward her, using its hands and feet like an animal, its joints cracking and bending the wrong way. "Elena, don't leave me," it whispered, smiling. "I'm still your brother." She grabbed the doorknob and wrenched it violently, her pulse screaming in her ears. Behind her, the thing lurched forward. Elena threw herself sideways at the last second, just as it lunged. Its body slammed into the door with a sickening crunch, splintering the wood. For a brief moment, it was stunned. That was all she needed. She grabbed a rusted iron rod from the basement floor and swung it with everything she had. The rod smashed into its head, sending it reeling backward with an inhuman shriek. Elena didn't wait. She scrambled up the stairs, pounding against the door with all her strength. The wood cracked, then splintered, and suddenly, she was through, tumbling into the main floor of the house. He slammed the door shut behind her, shoving an old wooden chair under the handle. From the other side, the thing let out a low, rattling laugh. "Elena." She staggered backward, her chest heaving. Then she heard it, a wet, papery sound, like more skin peeling away. She wasn't alone in this house. There were more of them, and they were waiting for her. Elena's heart pounded as she backed away from the door, her breath coming in jagged bursts. The sound of scraping echoed through the house, low and unnerving. She didn't have to see it to know what was happening on the other side. More of them were coming. She had no idea how many had already molted. How many of them were now wearing someone else's face, or had no face at all. Every corner of the house felt alive, shifting, pressing in on her. The air was heavy with the scent of rot, thick and suffocating. But she couldn't stop. Not now. Elena's eyes darted around the room. It was old, the wallpaper peeling in strips, the floorboards warped beneath her feet. But there was something wrong. The walls, the floor. There were indentations, dark smudges, like the marks left by too many hands pressing against them. She could almost hear the sound of scraping nails as they moved just beneath the surface. She shook her head. Focus. Her eyes found the window. It was her only chance. But as she crossed the room, her body stiffened. Behind her, the air shifted. She could feel it, a coldness crawling up her spine. And then, the floorboard creaked. Elena spun around, eyes wild. A figure stood in the doorway. It was tall, its limbs too long, its body hunched forward like it was struggling to fit in the space. But it wasn't the figure that terrified her most. It was the empty face. The skin was gone, torn away in ragged strips. The skull beneath was smooth, shiny, almost slick, as though it had been polished by the same thing inside it that had ripped its skin off. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to absorb light, as if the thing was made of darkness. It was staring at her. Elena. It whispered. It didn't speak like a human. Its voice was a garbled, guttural rasp, a thing that had once been. But even as it moved closer, there was no hesitation in its actions. The thing knew what it was doing. It was hunting. She darted for the window. With shaking hands, Elena grabbed the sash and yanked. The window didn't budge. The wood was swollen from the humidity, but she kept pulling, her fingers numb. The thing's breath was hot on her neck. Elena felt a searing pain. Sharp fingers dug into her shoulder, jerking her back. A crack rang out as her head collided with the wall. Her vision swam. With a strangled scream, she tore herself free. She wasn't going to die like this. She wasn't going to let them win. With a final, desperate push, she wrenched the window open. Cold night air rushed in, sharp and bitter. The window led to a small fire escape, its rusted metal stairs barely visible in the dark. The thing behind her let out a hiss, the sound guttural, the air thick with the stench of decay. Elena scrambled out onto the fire escape. She was free for now. But as she climbed down, the whispers started again. From inside the house, voices. Not one, not two. Hundreds, all of them talking, screaming, whispers in every direction. Elena's blood ran cold. She dared not look up. She didn't want to know how many had been left behind. She reached the ground, her feet hitting the damp soil with a thud. She turned, eyes wild, but there was no one. Not yet. The Marrow house loomed behind her, its broken windows staring out like hollow eyes, watching her every move. And behind those windows, behind every door, was the sound of skin ripping. And in the distance, the bell tolled once more. Doom. Elena ran through the thick fog, her feet sinking into the soft earth as she stumbled forward, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The Marrow house loomed behind her, its twisted windows like eyes watching. The whispers had faded, but she could still feel the cold presence of something waiting, something hunting her. The fog felt endless, wrapping around her like a thick, suffocating shroud. Every step was a fight, her legs aching, her heart pounding in her chest. But she couldn't stop. She didn't know how long she'd been running. Minutes? Hours? The silence felt deafening, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps and the distant echo of the bell tolling from the Marrow house. Then ahead, something appeared through the fog. A gate, tall and rusted. It stood at the entrance to a field. The iron bars twisted and bent like they had been warped by years of neglect, or something far worse. Behind it, she could make out the shape of something sprawling, an overgrown field, stretching endlessly. But the land was wrong. It felt off, like it had been contaminated by the very air she was breathing. She reached for the gate, her fingers trembling as she touched the cold metal. The rust flaked off beneath her grip, but the gate didn't budge. Panic surged through her chest. She tried again, pulling with all her strength, but it was as though the gate was welded shut, holding her back. Elena. The voice was soft at first. Elena froze. It was a voice she recognized, but it wasn't quite right. Elena. He turned, and there, standing in the mist, was Noah. His face was still changing, the skin peeling away in long, dry sheets. His eyes were sunken, hollow, and his mouth was twisted into a grin that stretched too far. Noah, she whispered, her heart sinking into her stomach. His head tilted, the movement jerky, unnatural. Elena, you have to come with me. His voice was wrong, layered with something that wasn't him. Elena. Her skin prickled with cold dread as his voice warped, echoing in the thick fog. She couldn't stop herself from backing away, but her feet were rooted to the spot. It wasn't Noah. It couldn't be. He was gone, just like the others. Please. The thing that had once been Noah said, stepping forward, its movements almost too fluid, its limbs stretching unnaturally. Elena, it's not too late. She shook her head, her heart hammering. You're not him. Her voice faltered as she took another step back. You're not Noah. But the thing smiled. Its mouth widened impossibly. The smile wasn't human, it was something twisted. Noah's gone, it rasped. But you can still join us. You can still. The rest of its words were lost as the fog parted suddenly, revealing something far worse. The field. It wasn't a field at all. It was an endless sea of bodies. People. Thousands of them. Stretched out across the ground. Their skin peeling away. Their faces frozen in expressions of horror and pain. Some of them were still moving, but they weren't alive. Not anymore. Their bodies were like empty shells, crawling with things that Elena couldn't even begin to understand. It was a graveyard, but the bodies weren't buried. They were shifting, alive, still in the process of shedding their old skin, still giving in to whatever had taken them. And there, right at the center of it all, was a massive tree. Its roots spread like dark veins, wrapping around the bodies, pulling them into the ground, as if it was feeding. And beneath it, deep within the roots, was something black and pulsating. The ground beneath Elena's feet trembled. "Noah," she screamed. "No!" The thing in front of her grinned again. "We're waiting for you." Her pulse thundered in her ears as she turned to the gate, yanking at it again, but it held fast. She could feel the eyes of those bodies on her, the voices still calling her name, pulling her in. The fog thickened. She could barely see through it anymore, but the whispers were clearer now, louder. And as she looked back one last time, the thing that had once been Noah was no longer standing alone. There were others, more like it, creeping forward, their limbs unnaturally long, dragging themselves across the ground with jerking movements. Their skin was gone, their bodies torn open. They were the ones who had shed. Elena's scream echoed through the fog. She felt the gate shudder beneath her hands. And then it opened. The gate groaned open, the rusty metal creaking in protest as Elena stumbled through. She barely registered the sound. It was drowned out by the deafening chorus of whispers, now a cacophony, all around her. The bodies in the field shifted and groaned as though they were waking, and each one of them was staring at her. She ran. Her legs felt like lead as she pushed herself through the thick, slick soil. Every breath she took tasted like dust and decay. The fog clung to her skin, sinking into her clothes as though it wanted to swallow her whole. The air felt charged, thick with something alive but not human. The tree at the center of the field loomed ahead. Its massive, gnarled branches twisted like fingers stretching into the sky, dark and unnatural. It was the source of everything, the place where they all came from. The root system below it pulsed, the earth trembling as though the tree itself was alive, breathing. And beneath the tree, there it was, the thing, the black mass beneath the roots, hidden in the deep earth, pulsing, shifting, alive. It was the heart of the nightmare, the core. Elena's stomach twisted with fear and disgust, but she couldn't stop herself. She was drawn to it, like a moth to a flame. The whispers inside her head grew louder, more insistent, like they were coming from the very roots of the tree itself. "Come closer," the voices hissed. "Come and join us." "No!" Elena gasped, her voice hoarse. She dug her heels into the earth, trying to push herself away, but the ground seemed to pull her back. The soil was slick and wet, as though something below was holding her down, trying to drag her under. Behind her, the things that had once been human were crawling forward, their limbs twitching unnaturally. Their empty eyes followed her every move, and their twisted faces grinned, some of them barely human anymore. Elena. The sound was soft at first. She turned sharply. There, among the crawling, twitching forms, was Noah. His face was gone, nothing but smooth, glistening flesh in its place. His eyes were dark voids, hollow pits that stared straight into her. "Please, Elena," it rasped, the voice barely human. "Come home. It's where you belong." The ground shook again. Her eyes darted to the tree, to the thing beneath it, growing, shifting, alive. She wasn't sure what she feared more, the thing under the earth or the thing that had once been Noah, pleading for her to join him. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. With a force she didn't know she had, Elena pushed forward. She dug her hands into the wet soil, pulling herself toward the tree, her skin slick with mud and sweat. She had to destroy it, had to stop this. She couldn't let them win. "No," she gasped. "I won't let you take me. I won't let you." Her fingers brushed against something cold, something hard beneath the soil. She paused, her heart thundering in her chest. With shaking hands, she pulled it free. A rusted axe. The blade was dull, caked with dirt and grime, but it was sharp enough. With no hesitation, Elena raised the axe above her head and brought it down hard on the tree's roots. The impact sent a shock through her arm, but she didn't stop. She swung again, and again, and again, her breath ragged, her mind focused only on destroying it. The tree screamed. At least it sounded like a scream. The ground beneath her feet trembled violently. The sky above her darkened, and the fog swirled, thick and choking. Elena's blood ran cold as she felt the roots below her tremble, as though they were fighting back. The thing beneath the earth pulsed with a newfound fury. Elena stopped. The voice was louder now, more insistent, filled with rage and desperation. But Elena would not stop. She swung the axe again, tears streaming down her face, her muscles screaming from the effort. And then the earth split. The roots cracked. The thing beneath the tree let out a deafening scream, so loud that Elena had to cover her ears, her whole body trembling from the force of it. And the world around her began to fall apart. The fog shifted. The bodies in the field twisted and screamed, their mouths opening wide in impossible ways, their skin sloughing off faster than before. The tree's roots began to writhe like a living thing, pulling back into the ground, dragging everything with them. And at the center of it all, the black mass beneath the earth shuddered, writhing in agony. Elena stood her ground. She wasn't going to let it take her. Not now. Not ever. The ground beneath Elena's feet trembled violently, the tree's roots twisting like serpents as the world around her shuddered. The fog was no longer a thick blanket of haze. Now, it seemed like it was alive, swirling, suffocating. The air crackled with an unnatural energy. Something was awakening, and it was worse than anything she could have imagined. Elena held the axe in trembling hands, her fingers white-knuckled around the rusted handle. The tree groaned again, a sound like metal grinding against stone, as if it was trying to pull itself from the very earth. She could feel the vibrations in her bones, the screeching of roots twisting below her. "No, no!" Elena gasped, staggering back. The thing beneath the tree was stirring, its pulse growing stronger with every breath. She could feel it. It was alive. And it wasn't just a thing beneath the ground anymore. A horrible realization gripped her chest. The tree was a sentient being, a creature of unimaginable power, and the roots, the bodies, the molting. It had all been feeding it. Every person, every soul that had come here was part of it now, their bodies twisted and broken, their very essence devoured and recycled. It had been waiting for her. The ground beneath her feet cracked open, revealing the vast network of roots and the pulsating black mass below. The thing below the earth wasn't just a single entity. It was a colony, a mind, an ancient force that fed off the lives of those who passed through. It had been growing, spreading, taking everything and everyone, pulling them into its web. And it wanted her too. The world around Elena began to warp. The fog thickened, swirling around her legs, as though it were trying to pull her down. The trees, the other trees, began to shift, their bark cracking, their branches moving like skeletal hands reaching out to her. "Elena." The voice was low and seductive. It had no human warmth, just a cold, dark whispering that slid into her ears, filling her mind with poisonous thoughts. She turned, but the figure that emerged from the fog was not Noah. It was something worse. Its face was a perfect mirror of Noah's, but distorted, twisted. Its skinless face stretched into a grotesque grin. The figure stepped forward, its long limbs jerking unnaturally with every movement. Its eyes were black, empty sockets that gleamed with the faintest shimmer of light, like a starless sky. "You don't have to fight anymore," it crooned. "You've already won. Come Elena. Come back to us." Elena's stomach turned, and she recoiled. It wasn't Noah. It couldn't be. It was something that had once been him, a thing that had shed its skin and become something else, something worse. "No," he shouted, her voice raw. She raised the axe, her breath coming in gasps. "I won't join you." The thing smiled wider, its grin stretching impossibly, revealing jagged teeth, teeth that had never belonged to Noah. "Elena, you are one of us now," it hissed. "You've always been one of us." The skin, the shedding, it's inevitable. It's part of you. With a sudden, sickening motion, the thing's skin split along its chest, revealing an invisible mass, like a black cloud swirling beneath its flesh, seeping out of its pores. Elena stepped back, horror tightening her chest. She could see it now, the true face of the thing beneath the skin. A void, a hunger that had been waiting for her. A voice, a deep, unnatural voice, spoke from the void. It was the voice of the tree. Elena. The name echoed from all directions. It was not just from the thing standing before her, but from the fog, from the ground beneath her feet, from the very air. "You cannot escape us." The word sent a shudder through Elena's body. She had to stop it. She had to destroy it before it consumed her, before it took everything. She swung the axe again, but this time it struck something solid. The sound was dull, like hitting a thick, immovable wall. Her heart sank. The roots were too powerful. She was trapped. "Elena," the voice whispered again, this time with a tone of satisfaction. "There is no fight left in you. You are already becoming one with us." The figure took another step toward her. The fog parted around it, revealing the wretched, decaying faces of those who had come before her. The skinless ones, their bodies broken and twisted, moved in unison, their mouths stretching wide into a grotesque chorus of screams. Elena's pulse raced. Her breath was shallow as she took in the horrible scene before her. But then something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to die like this. She wasn't going to become part of this thing, this nightmare. Elena swung the axe one more time, her muscles burning, her hands slick with sweat. And this time, the axe struck deeper. The ground shuddered beneath her. The thing that had once been Noah screamed, a horrible, banshee-like wail, as the black mass beneath the roots split open, sending a wave of darkness rolling across the field. And with it, the ground began to collapse. The ground cracked beneath Elena's feet, the earth shuddering violently as the darkness began to pour from the mass beneath the roots. The axe was still in her hands, but her body was growing weaker by the second, her legs shaking, her breath shallow and ragged. The thing that had once been Noah was screaming, but it was no longer the voice of the person she had loved. It was a twisted, inhuman sound, a wail of agony and rage. Its skin began to tear further, splitting into strips as though it was being pulled apart, revealing the shifting, writhing void beneath. Elena's chest heaved. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. The mass, the darkness, was pulling her in, feeding on her terror, her despair. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She forced her feet to move, staggering back, but the ground was giving way. The very earth seemed to be sinking into the darkness. The fog thickened, and the faces of the skinless, the lost, began to appear once more, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams as they reached for her. "Elena." The voice was no longer just from the figure. It came from everywhere. The tree, the earth, the air itself. "Elena, stop fighting. It's time to shed. Join us." Her skin crawled at the thought, and she clutched the axe tighter, her grip slick with sweat and the cold terror that filled her. She was losing herself, her mind starting to slip like the fog was pulling her in. But she couldn't let it take her. She couldn't let it take anyone else. The tree groaned above her, its branches reaching out as if to embrace her, to pull her into its twisted grasp. The thing beneath it, the black mass, was no longer just a pulsing, unseen force. It was alive, and it was hungry. But Elena couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. The very air was thick with pressure, and the ground beneath her feet was giving way, collapsing into the dark abyss. She could feel the world around her cracking, as though everything was starting to unravel. Elena, it's already too late. You're already one of us. The shedding has begun. The voice, now clear and conscious, was mocking. It echoed inside her skull, reverberating through her brain. With one last burst of strength, Elena swung the axe again, but this time the air itself seemed to resist. The blade sunk into the tree's bark, but instead of cutting through, it stuck, the handle rattling in her hands as though something beneath the surface was pulling it back. The tree was alive. Elena. The voice came again, but this time it was not from the figure. It was deeper, more ancient, echoing from the earth itself. There is no escape. There is no return. You are one of us now. The dark mass beneath the earth roiled and shifted, rising with a horrible sucking sound, swallowing the roots, consuming the land. It was as though it were pulling the very foundation of the world into itself. Everything was falling apart. Elena gasped for breath, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her mind was fogged, but one thought remained clear. Destroy it. She swung the axe again, her strength almost gone. But as the blade cut into the roots again, something shifted. The ground rumbled, and the black mass below screamed, but this time, the scream was different. It was full of pain. It was like something was fighting back. The earth beneath her trembled, and suddenly, she was pulled, her feet sliding into the muck, her body falling toward the open chasm of darkness. Elena! The voice echoed, but she couldn't tell if it was the tree or something else, something more desperate, more human. Noah? But she couldn't focus on that now. The earth beneath her gave way completely, and with a sudden, violent force, Elena was dragged downward. She gasped, her fingers scrabbling against the edge of the crack, but it was too late. She was pulled into the black mass, falling into its cold, suffocating grip. Pain. It was everywhere. Her skin felt like it was burning, her very bones aching as if they were being pulled apart. She screamed, but the scream was swallowed by the darkness, absorbed by the mass, until she couldn't feel anything at all except for the relentless pull, the hunger deep within the earth. Elena. It was a whisper, her name, but it wasn't the tree. It wasn't the thing beneath the roots. It wasn't Noah. This voice was her own. She gasped. Suddenly, she was back on her feet. She blinked. She was no longer falling. The ground was solid again. The world had stopped shaking. And the voices, the whispers, they were gone. There was only silence. Elena looked around. The fog had dissipated, and the sky was clear. The tree was gone, as were the bodies, the horrible mass beneath the earth. Everything was still. She was standing in the middle of a field, a real field, one that felt natural, untouched. The trees were still, their branches gently swaying in the breeze. The grass was green. The air was fresh. She could hear birds in the distance, the soft rustling of leaves. And yet, something wasn't quite right. Elena took a step back. The ground beneath her trembled again. Her eyes widened as she saw the ground begin to crack once more. But this time, there was no scream, no voice, no pain, just the deafening sound of silence. And then the earth split open once again. The ground shuddered beneath her feet, sending a fresh wave of panic through Elena. She stumbled backward, her body trembling as the cracks spread across the earth, like veins pulsing with dark energy. This wasn't over. Not yet. The silence that had briefly settled over her was deceptive, a fleeting illusion. Now, the air felt heavy again, oppressive, and the once calm field around her seemed to warp, the landscape shifting, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow her whole. The sky darkened, and the familiar trees now seemed twisted, their branches stretching out like skeletal hands reaching for her. The wind began to pick up, howling around her ears with a shrieking force. No! Elena gasped, her heart pounding. She looked around frantically, her eyes darting from the earth to the sky to the forest that loomed in the distance. The world felt like it was closing in on her. She could feel it again, that presence, the thing beneath the earth, the ancient force that had fed on her fear, the molting that had claimed so many before her. It wasn't finished. She wasn't free. And now, she was beginning to understand that whatever she had destroyed had only been a small part of the whole, a fragment of the true horror that lay beneath this place. Her chest constricted as she began to realize the extent of the mistake she had made. Had she truly destroyed it? Or had she just torn open a new chapter of the nightmare? The earth trembled again, but this time it was accompanied by a soft whispering that rose from beneath the cracked ground. The voices were closer, clearer, swirling around her like a physical presence. Elena. Her breath caught in her throat. That voice again. The same voice that had haunted her from the very beginning. Noah's voice, but not Noah. A voice that now felt unearthly, like the tree, like the mass beneath the earth, like the thing that had been waiting for her. Elena. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, as the cracks widened further. You've opened the door. The path has been set. The ground beneath her splintered, and a figure began to rise from the chasm that had split the earth. It wasn't Noah. It wasn't even human. At first, Elena thought it was just a shadow, an illusion. But as it emerged from the dark void, she realized it was real, and that it was alive. The thing standing before her was the very essence of everything she had feared. Its body was twisted and malformed, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, with fingers that twisted and curled like roots from a tree. Its skin was translucent and slick, revealing a network of veins and tendrils that writhed beneath its surface. The figure's face was blank, smooth, except for empty eye sockets that seemed to stare into her soul, dark and bottomless. Elena. The voice came from everywhere now, not just from the figure, but from the earth itself, from the sky, from the wind. The ground trembled harder, and Elena could feel the weight of it, the burden of what she had unleashed, crushing down on her chest. No, she whispered, her heart racing, her pulse thundering in her ears. But the figure didn't move. It was staring at her, watching her, waiting. Elena, it repeated, its voice cold and detached, like a death sentence. You have been chosen. You are part of the cycle. The words were like a sickening invitation, a promise that everything she had endured, everything she had fought for, was for nothing. She stumbled backward, her chest heaving as she tried to steady herself. The voices, the whispers, they weren't just echoes now. They were real, and they were closing in. The figure tilted its head, its eyes, those dark, empty pits, shifting slightly. Elena felt a pull, as though it were siphoning her very energy, drawing her into its void. She could feel it deep in her bones, the sucking force of it, pulling at her. Stop, she cried out, her voice cracking. But the words were meaningless. The air around her thickened, pressing in like a heavy weight. The darkness, the thing beneath the earth, was reaching for her again. Her body tensed, instinctively preparing for a fight. But there was no escape from the force that was closing in on her. She was out of time. Elena, the voice, now almost a growl, came again. You cannot resist the call. You are part of us now. The earth trembled, and the figure began to move, its long, slender limbs stretching toward her, its fingers curling into sharp points like twisted claws. The ground around her cracked wide, and Elena was plunged into the void. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything went black. But then she was falling into a new darkness, a deeper one that didn't come from the earth, but from the very fabric of the universe itself. Elena was falling. It wasn't like any fall she had ever known. It wasn't the rapid descent of gravity. the sharp snap of impact. This was something slower, like being pulled down by invisible strings, dragged deeper into something unfathomable. Her body ached as if every part of her was being twisted, stretched, pulled apart. The darkness around her wasn't just a lack of light. It was an absence, a void, where the air itself felt alive, suffocating, pressing against her like a cold, oppressive force. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Her mouth was dry, her chest tight, and her vision, when she could force her eyes open, was nothing but an endless, swirling void of blackness. The thing, the mass, it was still there, beneath the earth, beneath her, watching her. It was more than just a nightmare now. It was real, and it was taking her, taking everything. The cycle, the voices, the force. It had been waiting for her. But why? A whisper echoed in her mind, soft at first, like the wind brushing past her ear. But it grew louder, stronger, closer. Elena. The voice of the thing beneath the earth, was still there, but it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was an experience, a presence that filled her chest and her throat, suffocating her. Elena. Her heart raced, thudding in her ears. The world spun around her as she tried to orient herself in the dark abyss. But there was no up, no down, only the swirling, oppressive nothingness. The whispers grew louder, until they became a chorus, 1,000 voices screaming at her from every direction. Their voices melded together into a single, unholy wail, a song of despair, of loss, of molting. Elena, you were part of the cycle. The words repeated, but now they weren't just words. They were truths that burrowed deep into her bones, into her soul. The cycle had always existed. It would always exist. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. The molting was inevitable. It was fate, and now it had claimed her. No! Elena gasped, the word barely escaping her lips. But her voice was swallowed by the void, lost to the darkness. She forced herself to focus, to hold on to some semblance of her own will. She refused to be consumed, refused to let this thing take her as it had taken so many before. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and her heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to push against the pull, to fight the darkness that threatened to overwhelm her. But it was too strong, too deep, and then she felt something. A shift, a subtle change in the air. It wasn't the whispering voices. It wasn't the presence of the thing beneath the earth. It was light. A faint, flickering glow broke through the pitch-black abyss. At first, it was barely noticeable, like the glow of a distant star through the fog. But it grew, slowly, steadily, until it was all around her, casting faint shadows that twisted and distorted as though they had a life of their own. And with the light came the feeling, the pull. The pull was back. This time, it wasn't from the earth. It wasn't the thing that had fed on her, that had wanted her soul. It was something else, something far older, far more ancient, something that had watched the thing beneath the earth for eons. Elena. The voice echoed again. It was a familiar voice, but different. It had a weight to it, more ancient, more knowing. And yet, there was something in it, a kind of hope, a kind of understanding. Elena, you must listen. Her heart thudded in her chest. She couldn't see the source of the voice, but she knew it was speaking to her. Something knew her name. Who are you? She whispered, her voice trembling in the vast emptiness. What do you want from me? The light grew brighter, now all around her, illuminating the abyss. For the first time, she could see not just the swirling, oppressive darkness, but shapes, figures, moving within it, flickering in and out like shadows on the edge of her vision. You've seen them, the voice said, closer now, as though it were standing beside her. The ones who came before you, the ones who have already fallen. Elena's eyes widened. She knew what it meant. The bodies, the ones who had been molted, the ones who had already been swallowed by the thing beneath the earth. No, she whispered. No there. Part of the cycle. The voice interrupted, its tone final, unyielding. The earth is fed on them, but they are not gone. They are part of something larger, part of the force. She felt her stomach churn, nausea rising within her. You are part of that force now, Elena. You cannot escape it, but you can change it. You can become what it needs you to be. Elena shook her head, her mind spinning with confusion. No, I don't want this. I won't become one of them. You already have, the voice said softly, but you still have a choice. You can be the key to breaking the cycle, or you can let it consume you and everything else. The light flickered, and she felt the earth shift beneath her once more, as though something was awakening. Something ancient, something waiting. The light flickered around Elena like an apparition, illuminating the vast emptiness of the abyss she was trapped in. The presence, the voice, had receded just slightly, as if giving her space to think, to process the magnitude of what was unfolding before her. The earth trembled again, a distant, drumming pulse that seemed to echo from the very core of the planet itself. You cannot escape this, Elena, the voice whispered once more. This time it was colder, as though its patience was wearing thin. You are already bound to it. The molting, it is part of you now. Elena clenched her fists, her nails digging into the palms of her hands. The fear, the raw, primal fear, was still there, gnawing at her insides, but somewhere deep inside, a cold certainty was beginning to take hold. The choice lay before her, as it had always been. She had never been free from it, the cycle. But to accept it? She had already seen the consequences. She had already seen them, the bodies of those who had been consumed, the hollowed-out forms, the empty eyes. She could feel the horror of it, deep in her bones, and she couldn't let herself become another molt, another soul swallowed whole by this unending abyss. No, she breathed, her voice gaining strength. I will not be part of this. I won't become one of them. The voice chuckled, low, eerie, and reverberating from all sides. You think you have a choice, Elena? You think you can defy the forces that have already marked you? I don't care, she shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. I won't let this cycle continue. The earth around her shuddered, as though reacting to her words, and for a moment, Elena felt the ground beneath her feet shift. The figures that had been flickering in the shadows, the ones who had already fallen, began to grow brighter, their forms becoming clearer. She could make out their faces, their expressions, as they drifted closer. They were not the living anymore. They were shadows, echoes, remnants of the past. Their faces were twisted in pain, in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. Their hands reached out, fingers trembling as if grasping at something just beyond their reach. One of the figures, a woman, reached out to Elena, her ghostly eyes locking with hers. Don't fight it. The woman's voice was almost a whisper, drifting on the wind. We tried, we all tried, but it cannot be escaped. Elena recoiled, her pulse racing. She took a step backward, as if to distance herself from the figure, but the woman's voice followed her. You don't understand, Elena. This isn't just about you. It's about everything. You are part of something bigger than you. You can't break the cycle, but you can shape it. You can decide how it will play out. Her words echoed in Elena's ears, the weight of them pressing down like an unseen hand. What do you mean? Elena gasped, her breath coming in short bursts. I don't want to become you. I don't want to become a mold, to be swallowed whole by this thing. You won't be swallowed, child. The woman's voice was gentle now, almost soothing. You will lead it, the forces beneath the earth. They need a vessel, a conduit. And you, Elena, you are the one they have chosen. The woman's face shifted, her features warping into something darker, more inhuman, like a twisted reflection of the thing Elena had seen earlier. Her skin began to crack, revealing dark tendrils beneath, crawling up from her chest. Elena's heart raced. Her mind was reeling. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But it was all real. And the more she tried to push it away, the more it seemed to surround her. Please, Elena whispered, her voice breaking. I don't want this. I don't want to be chosen. I don't want to be part of this thing, whatever it is. The woman's eyes softened, and she stepped closer, her spectral form gliding over the ground like a phantom. You already are Elena, but you don't have to be a slave to it. You can master it. You can shape it. Elena's body trembled with frustration, with the weight of the decision that was pressing down on her. She felt like she was drowning in it, the pressure, the fear, the hunger of the earth below her. "You don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "I can't be part of this. I can't control it. If I do, I'll become just like you like them." Her voice shook with the terror of the thought. The woman smiled, her cracked skin giving way to an even darker, more sinister form. "You will be more than us. You will be the catalyst, the one who controls the cycle, the one who decides how it will end." Elena could feel it, feel the earth beneath her, feel the weight of the force within her. She felt it tugging at her, pulling her, and she realized the terrible truth. The cycle was never ending. The thing beneath the earth had been waiting for someone, waiting for her. Her skin felt hot, the darkness in her bones racing to the surface, the pull of something ancient, something terrible. The abyss was calling, and it was pulling her toward it, toward the fate that she couldn't escape. But there was a choice, her choice. To accept it, to shape the cycle to her will, to be the master of it, or to fight it, to refuse the pull, to risk destroying everything in the process. Elena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had one final choice left, and she had to make it now. Elena's breath hitched as the weight of her decision pressed in on her from all sides. The abyss, the force beneath the earth, was pulling her, urging her, but her heart screamed with defiance. She couldn't give in. She wouldn't become part of it. Not like them, not like the others who had been swallowed by the cycle. But the choice. The choice loomed before her like a black hole, an event horizon that she couldn't look away from. To accept it, to become a vessel, a conduit for the force beneath, to control it, to shape it, or to reject it, to fight it with everything she had, knowing the destruction it could bring, not just to her, but to everything around her. Elena, the woman's voice drifted to her again, soft, almost coaxing. "Don't fight it. You can control it. You have the strength. You can stop the cycle from consuming the world." The words twisted and twisted in Elena's mind. The temptation of it, the power she could wield, the control she could take back. She'd seen the horrors of the cycle, those hollowed out bodies, those soulless eyes. But she also knew the depths of the thing beneath the earth. She had felt its hunger, its insatiable need. She could feel it now, its presence deep within her bones. She could feel the pull of something dark, something ancient, seeping into her blood. It wanted her. It wanted her to embrace it, to become its master, to lead it, to reshape the world in its image. But she couldn't, could she? The power, the temptation, it was too much to ignore. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the voices, the pressure. She tried to push it away, to focus on the truth, on the reality of the choice she faced. "I don't want to become like you," she whispered to the woman. "No, to the thing that had once been human. I don't want to be a part of the cycle. I won't let it take me." The woman's smile faltered, a flicker of something other crossing her face. The shadowy form that had once been familiar now seemed less human, more grotesque. Her features twisted, as though the earth itself was trying to reclaim her. "You cannot stop it," the voice came again, low and menacing. "The cycle will continue. You cannot run from it. You cannot fight it. You are a part of it now." "No," Elena said, her voice steadier now. "I refuse." The ground beneath her feet shuddered. The abyss seemed to shift, the darkness writhing, like a living thing. She could feel it now, all around her. The pressure was unbearable. The earth itself was groaning with the weight of ancient power. "You will fight, then?" The voice from the depths was angry now, the undertones of rage curling through the words. "You will destroy everything in your path, even yourself." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. The fear, the terror, it was all still there, gnawing at the edges of her resolve. But she couldn't let it take her. She couldn't. With a sharp breath, she stepped forward, the light flickering around her like a beacon. The shadowed figures, the lost souls who had been consumed by the cycle, reached out for her, their hollow eyes pleading, their hands grasping at her, trying to pull her into the depths. "You can't fight it," they whispered in unison, the air vibrating with their voices. "You can't escape." But Elena didn't look back. She couldn't. Her resolve was made. She raised her hand, feeling the warmth of her own skin against the coolness of the abyss. The darkness recoiled for a moment, as though sensing her defiance. The air around her crackled, shifting, as though the earth itself was reacting to her will. "I'm not like you," she said, her voice rising with strength. "I won't be consumed. I will break the cycle." The ground rumbled beneath her feet. The light intensified, a brilliant, blinding pulse that made her skin tingle. For a moment, Elena thought she was being swallowed whole, that the earth was opening up beneath her, ready to drag her into the black depths of the thing below. But it didn't happen. Instead, the light flared one final time, so bright, so blinding, that for a moment, Elena couldn't see. She felt it though, the shift. The earth around her trembled, and for the first time, she felt the pressure, the pull, the ease. She had done it. Somehow, she had done it. The cycle had not been broken, but for the first time, it had been halted. The pull of the darkness, the suffocating weight of the abyss, had loosened its grip on her, just enough to let her breathe. The voices that had once whispered so persistently, urging her to accept her fate, were gone. The shadows were still there, but now they were distant, fading in the background like echoes of a nightmare that had finally started to fade into the morning light. "Elena," a voice whispered, distant but not menacing, not threatening. Elena turned, her eyes still adjusting to the fading light. She saw the woman's figure once more, no longer twisted, no longer grotesque. She was a ghost, a figure lost to time, but her eyes were no longer filled with desperation. There was something softer in her gaze, something almost reassuring. "You did it," the woman said, her voice gentle now. "You stopped it? For now. For now." Elena asked, still panting, her chest heaving. She felt like she had just fought a battle and barely escaped. "There is always a cycle," the woman said with a sad smile. "It will return, but you have given the world a reprieve, a chance to rebuild. And you." She stepped closer, her form flickering at the edges. "You have chosen your path, and you will continue to shape it." Elena didn't respond right away. She was still absorbing everything, the weight of what she had done, the truth that had been revealed to her. She had fought the abyss, and for now, she had won. But what came next? Could she truly control it? Could she keep the cycle from consuming everything? "Thank you," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can ever repay you for this." The woman's smile was soft. "You've already done it, Elena. You've already changed everything. For the first time, the cycle is no longer inevitable." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the lingering warmth of the light around her. There was still darkness. There was still power beneath the earth, deep and hungry. But she had bought time. She had a chance. And that was all she needed. Elena stood alone in the heart of the shifting earth, the ground beneath her feet rumbling faintly as though acknowledging her presence. The light had dimmed, and now only the faint glow of her own pulse filled the air, a soft rhythm echoing against the darkness. The woman, no, the entity, had faded into the distance, her presence no longer an immediate weight on Elena's mind. But the truth lingered like a shadow in the corner of her thoughts. The cycle hadn't been broken. It had merely been paused, delayed, perhaps only for a time. The earth would continue to churn beneath the surface, its hunger waiting to consume. But Elena had made a choice. She had fought the abyss, and she had survived. For now. She took a slow breath, the air feeling heavier than it ever had before. The absence of the dark force that had clung to her was palpable, but a cold emptiness had replaced it, one she hadn't expected. A feeling that perhaps there was more to this, more than just the earth, the force beneath it. She glanced around, seeing the fragments of the cycle still lingering at the edge of her vision. The faces of the souls who had been caught in the web of the abyss. They were fading, but they were still there, their silent forms stretching far into the distance, waiting for the moment when they would be called again. Was there more? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft rustle, the sound barely audible beneath the stillness. Elena froze, her senses sharpening. A shadow moved. No, it was not just one shadow, but a flurry like whispers in the wind. Her pulse quickened. For a split second, she thought she saw a flicker of the figure, the woman, her form shifting, fading in and out. Was it an illusion? Or something more? Elena! The voice came again, not from the earth, but from within her, like a heartbeat. It was not the woman this time, but something deeper, something far older, something that had always been inside her. Elena staggered back, her heart racing in her chest. She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel it, the tugging sensation, like invisible threads pulling at her very soul. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I'm not part of this. I won't be." But the sensation continued. It was inside her, all around her. She could feel it, an ancient force pressing against her, urging her to yield, to succumb to the inevitable. It was the cycle, yes, but it was more than that. It was her. Her pulse began to race, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The woman's words echoed in her mind. "You have the strength. You can stop it, but you can also shape it. You can decide how it will play out." The weight of that statement settled over Elena like a heavy cloak. She had only postponed the cycle, but had she truly stopped it? Or was the cycle already within her, waiting for the moment when it could reassert itself, when the earth would call on her once more? "Elena!" The voice was insistent now, urgent, and she could feel the pull becoming unbearable. It was her choice. It had always been her choice. Her head spun as her body shuddered with a strange, unfamiliar heat. She fell to her knees, her hands pressing into the earth as her pulse seemed to thrum through her, the very vibration of the world coursing through her veins. "No," she gasped again, but it was no use. Her body was no longer her own. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, the world began to unravel. The cycle, the force beneath the earth, it was all becoming one. And Elena was in the center of it, a vessel for the ancient power that flowed beneath the crust of the world. It was not just about the earth anymore. It was about the world itself, the balance that had been maintained for millennia, the forces that had shaped everything into being. And now Elena felt them all rising, the ancient powers, the ones who had been waiting for her. For a moment, Elena thought she might lose herself entirely to the force, but then a wave of clarity washed over her. Her heartbeat slowed, and the fire in her veins dimmed to a steady pulse. This wasn't just a force to be resisted. It was a force to be understood, mastered. Elena opened her eyes. The shadows had retreated, and the earth had become still once again. She was standing alone, her fingers still pressed into the ground. The air around her was thick, heavy with power, but it was her power now. She controlled it, but a soft voice still lingered in her mind, quiet, like a reminder. It wasn't the woman anymore, but something else, something greater. "You are reborn, Elena," the voice whispered, "but the cycle is still at work. The world will always need a keeper. You're not done, not yet." Elena straightened up, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The choice had been made. She had been reborn. She had embraced the cycle. Yes, but on her own terms. She was no longer just a victim. She was its master, its catalyst. But with that power came a burden, a responsibility. The world still needed to be balanced. And as its keeper, Elena knew her work had only just begun. There was still darkness in the world. There would always be darkness. But now, Elena was the one who would decide whether that darkness would swallow the light or let it shine. The sky above her had shifted. Elena stood on the edge of the world, a vast, open expanse stretching out before her, the horizon folding into a haze of mist and shadows. The earth had changed, her connection to it deeper than ever before. It whispered to her constantly now, its pulse a steady thrum beneath her feet. She was aware of everything, the subtle tremors of the ground, the dark currents beneath the soil, the restless winds that whispered in forgotten tongues. The force that had once been an external terror now flowed through her, threading into her soul like the root of an ancient tree. And she felt it, the weight of it. The earth was alive, and it was aching. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she held them before her, fingers outstretched. She could feel the power coursing beneath her skin, burning like wildfire, and it was so real now. No longer a concept, no longer a distant threat. The earth was her, and she was the earth. The boundaries between them had dissolved. The shadowy voices that once filled her mind with chaos had quieted, but their absence left something colder behind: purpose. The truth. She was no longer the victim. She was the keeper, the guardian, the balance. But she could already feel the pull of the world's darker forces. Corruption, decay, the things that had always lingered in the corners of existence. The abyss beneath the earth was not an empty void, but a place where all of creation's worst instincts festered. And now, as the keeper, it was her job to hold it at bay. She closed her eyes, letting the power within her rise, feeling the veins of the world intertwining with hers. It was more than a sense of awareness. It was a presence, a pressure, an ancient weight pressing on her chest, urging her to act. But how? How could she balance this vast, unrelenting force with the fragile life that teetered on the edge of extinction? A low hum vibrated in the air, making her skin tingle. Elena's eyes snapped open, and in the distance, a figure emerged from the shadowed edges of the landscape, a familiar shape that made her heart stutter. The woman. Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was the same form, the same shape that had coaxed her, that had once sought to control her. But now, there was no warmth in the woman's face, no softening. Her eyes were cold, hollow, empty, as if she were a reflection of something long lost. The woman's hands were outstretched, a blackened thread extending from her fingertips to the earth itself. Elena didn't have to ask. She could feel the darkness in the woman, the same darkness she had fought to escape. "You've changed." The woman's voice was a soft rasp, hollow with the weight of time. "But don't think you can control it. You cannot outrun what is in your blood." Elena's stomach churned. She felt it too, the pull, the inherent corruption deep within her, the curse of the cycle that would never be fully erased. "You don't understand," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear growing inside her. "I've made my choice. I won't be your puppet anymore. I control this now." The woman's smile twisted in the corners of her mouth, but there was nothing warm about it. It was a mockery. "Control," she scoffed. "You are the keeper, yes, but you are also its prisoner. You cannot hold it back forever." The earth rumbled beneath them, the ground shaking violently as if in agreement. Elena staggered, her knees buckling slightly as the power surged beneath her. The woman's eyes glinted with something darker, something that seemed to know Elena's inner turmoil. "You don't have to be a prisoner, you know," the woman said, her voice lowering to a dangerous purr. "You could join me. You could embrace it. Take the power for yourself. Let it fill you. Let it consume you." Elena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the darkness, the way it was tugging at her, trying to draw her in. She had always been so afraid of it. But now, her fingers clenched into fists at her sides, a wave of anger rushing through her. "I've fought too long to become like you. I won't let the cycle take me." The woman's laugh echoed around her, a brittle, hollow sound that made Elena's skin crawl. "You think you're different? You think you're immune? The earth will always call. The hunger will never stop. You'll fall, just like all the rest. There's nothing you can do to stop it." The shadows around the woman deepened, swirling into a vortex of dark energy. Elena felt the air grow heavier, the weight of the earth pulling her in every direction. "No," Elena whispered, her voice trembling with resolve. "I won't. The ground cracked beneath her feet. A vast rift split open in the earth, the dark abyss yawning before her. Elena could feel the pull of the deep, the echo of the ancient power that waited to consume everything. It was a force beyond her understanding, but it was inside her now, and she would not let it control her. With a cry, Elena stretched her hands out before her, focusing every ounce of willpower into them. The power of the earth surged in response, a burst of energy that radiated outward from her core. Light, blinding, pure, and unstoppable, flared up around her, surrounding her in a protective sphere. The darkness recoiled, screeching in defiance, but Elena held her ground. The woman's form flickered, a ghost fading in and out as Elena's light pushed against her. "You cannot fight what is inevitable," the woman spat, her words barely audible beneath the roar of energy surrounding Elena. "You will see. You will become part of it." But Elena didn't falter. The light was her anchor now, a part of her soul intertwined with the earth's pulse. She was not the abyss's prisoner. She was its keeper, its protector, not its servant. With a final, guttural cry, the woman disappeared into the shadows, her form vanishing into the swirling darkness below. The rift in the earth began to close, the tremors subsiding. The world fell silent once again, but Elena knew better than to believe the silence would last. The earth was calm, almost deceptively so. The rift had closed, and the haunting presence of the woman had vanished. Elena stood alone, her breath still coming in shallow gasps as she tried to steady herself. The force that had once felt like an overwhelming burden now hummed in her veins, an almost comforting vibration that matched the heartbeat of the world. But her victory, fleeting though it was, felt more like a temporary reprieve. She could still feel it, the hunger deep beneath the earth, beyond the reach of her senses. It was not gone. It was still waiting, watching. The cycle would return, and she knew it wouldn't come quietly. Elena's mind drifted back to the woman's final words. "You will become part of it." Was that a threat? A prophecy? Her eyes narrowed as she gazed at the horizon, the dim light of dusk casting long shadows over the land. The earth trembled beneath her feet again, but this time it wasn't from an external force. No, this tremor was hers, a manifestation of her power, of her bond with the world beneath. It was the cycle still pulsing. She could feel it, curling its fingers around her heart, seeking to devour her resolve. "Elena." The voice reached her again, a whisper carried on the wind. It was not the woman. This was different. This was deeper, more ancient. The earth itself spoke. She clenched her fists, her body tense, as the words echoed in her mind. They were not clear, but the meaning was unmistakable. The world was calling her, not as a keeper, not as a protector, but as something more. A vessel. Her stomach twisted as she fought to suppress the gnawing sensation, the instinct to give in. The power beneath her skin buzzed with potential, the world itself asking her to let go of everything she had fought for. It was offering her dominion, absolute control. But at what cost? "Elena," the voice murmured again. "The burden is too great for one. Let it go. Let us guide you." She shook her head violently, her hair whipping around her face. The voice wasn't one of compassion. It was the whisper of temptation, the call of corruption. "No," she said aloud, forcing her voice to be strong. "I will not succumb. Not again." But the ground beneath her feet trembled more violently now, shaking her to her core. Something was coming, something far more dangerous. And then she felt it. A shadow fell across the land, creeping up from behind her, casting an oppressive darkness over the world. It was not just the absence of light, it was a presence, a force. The woman had spoken the truth. The cycle couldn't be defeated. It could only be delayed. But who would she be when it inevitably returned? Would she become like the woman? Would she allow herself to be corrupted, to wield the power of the earth at the cost of her soul? The ground cracked again, and Elena's eyes went wide with realization. The earth was speaking to her, but not in a way that felt like a plea. It was a command. A surge of power coursed through her, overwhelming her senses, and the air around her grew heavy with darkness. And then she saw it, the first signs of what was coming. The earth split open before her like a vast wound, and from the depths, figures emerged. These were not the lost souls she had encountered before. These figures were shapeless, their forms undulating, stretching, and morphing into grotesque, otherworldly shapes. They writhed, their features unrecognizable, covered in slick, black skin that gleamed in the dimming light. They moved with an unnatural grace, their movements fluid and disjointed, as if they were not entirely bound by the laws of the physical world. The Guardians. A wave of dread washed over Elena as she recognized them. Creatures born from the very cycle she had sworn to protect against. Twisted, ancient beings that once ruled the earth, bound to the earth's hunger. Their eyes gleamed like pools of ink, their long limbs twisting unnaturally as they advanced toward her. Elena, one of the creatures crooned, its voice a low hiss, like the rustling of dead leaves. You cannot stop us. We are the Earth's true children, and you, dear keeper, are merely the first. The words reverberated through her chest, but Elena stood firm, her feet planted in the cracked earth. She could feel her power surging in response, a fierce, burning energy that threatened to consume her. But these creatures were no mere whispers. They were the embodiment of the very darkness she had faced. I won't let you consume the world, Elena shouted, her voice trembling with a power that threatened to crack the earth beneath her. I will protect this land. I will not be your vessel. The creature laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed across the land. You are already ours, it hissed. You were born to lead us. You are part of us, and you always will be. The ground beneath Elena's feet rumbled, louder now. The earth groaned, its hunger growing, as the Guardians surrounded her. Their twisted limbs reached out toward her, and Elena felt the pull once again. The darkness clawed at her, pressing into her skin, urging her to yield. But she refused. She had already made her choice. She was the keeper, not their servant. With a scream of defiance, Elena thrust her arms forward, summoning the light that now pulsed within her, her connection to the Earth's core. A flash of pure energy erupted from her, blinding in its intensity. The Guardians recoiled, their grotesque forms screeching as the light forced them back. But even as the Guardians staggered, Elena felt it, the darkness creeping closer, deeper. More figures were coming. The hunger was not just beneath her feet anymore. It was in her veins, in her thoughts, in her very soul. The cycle was not just a force. It was a part of her, and if she wasn't careful, she would become one of them. The light from Elena's outstretched arms burned through the air, the energy searing the land like a cleansing flame. For a moment, the Guardians recoiled, their forms twisting and screeching as the light scorched their dark, unnatural skin. Elena could feel them weakening, their hold on the Earth's hunger faltering under the force of her power. But she knew it wouldn't last. The darkness wasn't easily pushed back. The Guardians staggered but didn't retreat. Instead, they drew closer, their movements slow and deliberate, like ancient predators sizing up their prey. Elena's breath came in sharp, ragged gasps as the weight of her power began to take its toll. Her connection to the Earth was growing, yes, but it was also becoming something more insidious. She could feel it in her very bones, the corruption trying to take root inside her. Elena, one of the Guardians whispered, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves. It is in you. You are part of the cycle. You can fight it, but you cannot escape it. The words sank into her mind like a poison. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the whispers, trying to force them from her thoughts. But the earth was no longer just beneath her feet. It was within her, and its hunger was becoming part of her, too. The Guardians circled, their eyes like endless voids, staring into her soul. Each step they took caused the earth to tremble beneath her, as if the land itself was calling to them. The power within her, the very force that was meant to protect the world, was becoming something else. A burden, a curse. She felt it then, an aching pull deep within her chest. It was as if something was dragging her down, pulling her toward the same abyss that the Guardians had emerged from. She staggered backward, her legs unsteady beneath her as the pressure on her body intensified. The earth was opening up again, and she could feel the presence of something far worse than what had already emerged. Something ancient, unseen. Her voice broke through the overwhelming pressure. "No," she cried. "I am the Keeper. I won't let you control me." The Guardian's laughter was a chorus of discordant sounds, echoing through the air like 1,000 voices crying out in agony. The ground cracked, and a rift began to form beneath Elena's feet. The darkness surged from the crack, swallowing the light she had created. "Elena, you cannot fight what you are. You are a part of this world's heart, and its heart beats for the darkness." One of the Guardians purred, its voice like a caress against her mind. She gasped, falling to her knees as the weight of the truth crushed her. The hunger inside her grew, feeding on her doubt, her fear. It wanted to consume her. The cycle wanted her. But Elena's eyes snapped open, and something inside her shifted. No, she would not be controlled. Not now. Not ever. With a forceful roar, she pushed against the darkness, her hands glowing with a fierce light that burned brighter than ever before. The Guardians faltered, their twisted forms recoiling from the light as if burned by the very essence of it. For a fleeting moment, Elena felt a surge of triumph. But as the Guardians writhed and screeched in pain, she realized that the victory was hollow. The Earth's hunger hadn't been quelled. It had only shifted. The balance was tipping, and the pull to the abyss was stronger than ever before. The cycle had begun again. "Elena," a voice whispered from within her. The Earth's voice. It was soft, gentle, but it was not kind. She felt it deep within her, the binding connection to the world. The feeling that her very being was becoming intertwined with something much older, much darker than she could have ever imagined. It was as if the earth itself was pulling her down, urging her to embrace the darkness that had always been a part of her. The pull was intoxicating like a drug. She could feel the weight of it, the power, limitless and uncontrollable. She clenched her fists, her entire body trembling with the force of the temptation. This was the path the Guardians had spoken of. Elena. The voice was coming from within her again, louder this time. It was an invitation, a command. She was the Keeper, but she was also something more. The power of the earth, the very cycle of life and death, it was hers to command. All she had to do was accept it. And yet, something inside her rebelled against the offer. The pull of the darkness was undeniable, but it wasn't hers to wield. It wasn't hers to control. It was the Earth's hunger. And if she gave in, if she embraced it fully, there would be no turning back. Her pulse raced, and her vision blurred as the darkness pressed in on her. But she held firm, pushing against it. She was the Keeper. She had chosen this path, and she would not be consumed. With every ounce of strength, Elena threw herself into the light once more, her hands stretching toward the earth beneath her. The power surged from her, rippling through the ground, a wave of pure energy. For a moment, the earth trembled violently. The Guardians faltered, retreating for the briefest of moments. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as the ground cracked open around her. The rift beneath her feet swallowed the Guardians whole, dragging them back into the depths of the earth. But it was a temporary victory. She knew it. The cycle was still there. The earth was still hungry. But for now, Elena stood her ground. She could feel it, the whisper in the back of her mind, the constant pull toward the depths. Her battle was far from over. It was only beginning. The night settled heavily over the land, the air thick with an unsettling stillness that clung to Elena's skin. Her pulse was steady, but her thoughts were anything but. The battle with the Guardians, though victorious for now, had left her shaken. She could still feel the weight of the darkness, like a shadow lurking just behind her eyes, always waiting to slip inside her, to pull her deeper into the earth's endless hunger. Her connection to the earth had always been strong, but now It felt as if it were becoming something more. The lines between the land and herself had blurred. She could hear the earth's heartbeat beneath her feet, its whispers in the wind. But it wasn't a plea anymore. It was a command. Elena. The voice that had haunted her thoughts, the voice of the earth itself, echoed in her mind again. It was softer now, like a lover's call, soothing but dangerous. Tempting. I am waiting, the voice whispered. You need only embrace me. Embrace the cycle. The words slithered inside her like a poison, making her skin crawl. Every inch of her being screamed to resist it. But the hunger inside her, the one she could not escape, made her doubt herself. She had seen the Guardians. She had felt their power, and a part of her had wanted it. The darkness called to her, promised her the kind of strength that could bend the very world to her will. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to the ground, feeling the vibrations ripple through her. The earth was alive, moving beneath her fingertips, pulling her toward it, demanding her submission. No, she whispered to herself, gritting her teeth. I won't become like them. I won't give in. But the temptation was growing, and her mind was growing weary. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her resolve. Elena had been the keeper, the one who held the line, but it was becoming harder to see where the line was anymore. Was she still herself? Or had she already become something else? Something darker? She pushed herself up, forcing herself to stand. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she took a step forward. The air felt thick, suffocating. Every step felt like she was sinking deeper into something she could no longer understand. The ground beneath her feet had shifted. It was not just the earth. It was something alive, something aware. And she was a part of it now. The sky above her had turned an ominous shade of black, the stars barely visible beneath the swirling clouds. A storm was brewing, and not just in the sky. The earth itself seemed to be waiting for something, holding its breath, as if preparing for a reckoning. Elena. The voice was louder now, not in her mind, but from behind her. She spun around, her heart racing. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, a silhouette barely visible in the dim light. It was a woman, but not one Elena recognized. Her features were obscured, her body cloaked in shadows. The air around her seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, an energy that made Elena's skin prickle, her stomach twist in anxiety. The woman took a slow step forward, her presence radiating an undeniable power, the same kind that the Guardians had exuded. Elena's instinct screamed at her to run, to escape whatever this woman was, but her feet wouldn't move. You felt it. The woman's voice was low, resonating with the ancient rhythm of the earth itself. The pull, the truth of who you really are. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the truth rising within her, the same truth she had been fighting to ignore. She was tied to this land, to the earth's hunger, in a way she couldn't escape. She had tried to protect the world from its darkness, but maybe she was only delaying the inevitable. You are a child of the cycle, the woman continued, her eyes gleaming with something Elena couldn't quite place. You were born to lead it, to embrace it. Don't you see? You are the bridge. Elena shook her head, trying to deny the truth. No, I'm not like them. I will stop it. The woman stepped closer, her presence overwhelming, almost suffocating. You cannot stop what has already begun. It is in you. It always has been. A pulse of energy shot through Elena, and she stumbled back, her body convulsing as the earth's power surged through her. The force was inescapable, like being dragged underwater, unable to breathe. Her vision blurred, and her head felt like it was splitting apart. But then something inside her snapped. No, she gasped, clenching her fists. I am not your servant. The woman's lips curled into a dark smile. You don't understand, child. You already are. The world seemed to tilt, and the earth groaned beneath her feet, the hunger rising again, fiercer this time, as if it were awakening from a long slumber. The rift, the cycle, it wasn't a thing. It was alive, and it was growing. Elena, the woman's voice wrapped around her like a thick, suffocating fog. Join me. Join the earth. Become one with us. You are destined to leave the cycle. Elena's heart raced, the pressure of the power building inside her, making her feel like she was about to burst. She was fighting against herself, fighting against the very thing she had become. Her hands shook, but she didn't let go of the light that still flickered within her. She had to hold on to it. She had to remain human. She was the keeper, not the destroyer. No, Elena whispered again, this time with more conviction. I won't give in. I will never give in. With a final, guttural scream, Elena summoned the energy within her, pushing against the pull of the darkness with everything she had left. The world around her shook violently, the storm above intensifying as the earth's hunger tried to devour her whole. But Elena wasn't finished yet. She wasn't done fighting. The ground beneath Elena's feet cracked and groaned, the rift widening, pulling at her from below like an insatiable maw. Every pulse of energy felt like the earth itself was weeping, its hunger unquenchable, its power unyielding. She could hear it now, the sound of the land crying out, the deep, mournful sound of the world calling to her, demanding her submission. Elena staggered forward, her legs heavy with the weight of the earth's power pressing against her, trying to draw her in. She could feel the darkness creeping up her spine, wrapping around her bones, reaching for her heart. It wanted her. The earth wanted her. But Elena could still feel the light inside her, a small flicker that refused to be extinguished. It wasn't enough, though. The darkness was stronger, and every moment she resisted, it pushed harder. The Guardian's words echoed in her mind, twisted and distorted, reminding her of the truth she feared. You are part of it. The cycle is in you. Elena. She froze. The voice was not in her head this time. It came from somewhere deeper, from the very core of the earth. The woman, whoever she was still there, her presence lingering in the air like a suffocating fog. Elena's stomach twisted, nausea curling around her as she felt the pull of the woman's energy wrap around her. You think you can fight this, the woman said, her voice a low whisper that seemed to seep into Elena's skin. But it is in your blood. It is in your soul. Elena shook her head, her breath quickening. No, I am not one of you. I will not become a part of your cycle. The woman's laughter was cold, almost hollow, as if it came from a place too ancient for Elena to comprehend. You misunderstand. You're already part of it. You always have been. The earth trembled again, sending a shockwave of power through Elena's body. She gasped, clutching her chest as the weight of it pressed down on her. The hunger was so much closer now, filling every part of her, feeding on her resistance. The flicker of light inside her was growing dimmer, and she could feel it, feel herself slipping, her grip on reality loosening. It was happening. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight back, but every word the woman had spoken felt like the truth, like an undeniable weight on her chest. Could she really stop this? Could she truly resist what she had become? Her hands were shaking, her palms slick with sweat as she placed them flat on the ground, feeling the pulse of the earth through her fingertips. It was too much. The darkness was everywhere, inside her and outside of her. Elena, the woman whispered again, and this time the voice was closer, as though the woman was standing directly behind her. The cycle is ancient. You cannot stop it. It is the way of the world. It is you. Her head snapped up, and Elena's eyes widened in horror as she saw the earth before her, the cracks in the ground widening, the blackness reaching out from the rift. It wasn't just the hunger. It was something more, something alive. The earth's power had taken on a new form, darker, more intelligent. The hunger had become something more insidious, something that could think, feel, control. Elena, the woman's voice became softer, almost pitying. You were never meant to fight this. You were meant to join it. A deep, suffocating silence settled over the land, and for a long moment, Elena couldn't move. She was caught between the power of the earth and the pull of the woman, torn between resisting the darkness and surrendering to it. Her knees gave way beneath her, and she fell to the ground, her hands still pressed against the earth. She could feel it now. The weight of the earth's hunger was inside her, pressing against her soul. The rift beneath her feet yawned wide, and she could see the swirling depths below, the darkness beckoning. The woman's hand reached out, her fingers brushing against Elena's cheek. Her touch was cold like ice, but it was also comforting. A part of Elena wanted to pull away, wanted to fight. But another part of her, a part she didn't recognize, leaned into the touch, feeling the promise of power, of knowledge. Elena, don't you see? The woman's voice was almost a song now, a lullaby. This is who you are. This is what you were born to be. The darkness clawed at her from within. The hunger. It was taking her. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Elena allowed herself to look into the abyss. The darkness didn't just want her, it wanted everything. The land, the sky, the stars above, they were all part of the cycle, and she too was part of it. Elena, the woman's voice, soft and insistent, slipped into her ear like a lover's whisper. You can fight it, but it will never be enough. The earth is in you. It is your destiny. With a final breath, Elena let go. The world around her exploded into light and dark, power surging through her like a wave crashing against the shore. She could feel the earth's hunger fill her, filling every part of her body, of her soul. The power was her, and she was the power. She felt herself shift, felt her body change as the earth's hunger took hold. The transformation was violent, a twisting, writhing sensation as she was molded into something new. Her skin rippled, the air around her thickened, and her very being stretched to accommodate the dark power that had become part of her. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything was still. She was one with the earth. Her senses were stretched across the land, feeling every tremor, every vibration. Her soul was no longer just hers. It was part of the land, part of the hunger. The woman stepped back, watching Elena with a strange, almost reverent gaze. You have embraced the cycle, she whispered. You are its keeper now. The earth trembled beneath Elena's feet, and she could feel the hunger grow stronger. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The earth hummed beneath Elena's feet, its pulse steady and rhythmic, like a beating heart. Her senses were no longer confined to her body. They stretched outward, like tendrils weaving through the soil, the trees, the very air itself. She could feel everything, the faintest rustle of leaves, the tremor of a distant storm, the heartbeat of the world. But it wasn't a gift. It was a prison. Elena closed her eyes, trying to focus, but the overwhelming flood of sensations made it impossible. The power, the hunger, was everywhere, inside her and outside of her, a constant pressure that pressed down on her soul. You are one with the earth now. The woman's voice echoed in her mind, like a soothing lullaby. You are the cycle. You lead it. Let it? Elena shook her head, trying to clear the fog that clouded her thoughts. She had done this to stop the hunger, hadn't she? She had thought she could control it, could contain it. But now it felt like she was at its mercy. You cannot control what is already part of you, the woman's voice whispered, pulling at her mind. You have embraced it. You have joined the cycle. There is no turning back. The words were like chains, tightening around her chest. Elena's breath quickened, panic rising in her throat. She had failed. She had become everything she had feared, everything she swore she would never become. Her hands clenched into fists as she struggled to fight the overwhelming pull of the earth. But the hunger inside her only grew stronger, more insistent. She could feel the rift beneath her, like an abyss waiting to swallow the world. It wasn't just the land that was hungry now, it was the world itself. Elena, the voice, the woman, she was here, standing just behind her, though Elena didn't need to turn around to know it. The woman's presence was suffocating, her energy overwhelming. She could feel the weight of centuries of power behind her, the vastness of the earth's hunger woven into her being. Elena wanted to scream, wanted to tear herself free, but the woman's touch on her shoulder was like a vice, holding her in place. Do you feel it? The woman asked, her voice thick with satisfaction. The power that flows through you, through all of us? Elena nodded slowly, though the action felt foreign, as if her body were no longer hers to control. The power was coursing through her veins, a living thing, a flood that had no beginning and no end. It was alive, and she was alive with it. But it wasn't freedom, it was suffocation. "You were chosen for this," the woman continued, her voice smooth, almost coaxing. "You are the keeper. The earth is yours to command. The cycle is yours to lead." "No!" Elena clenched her jaw, pushing back the rising tide of darkness. She wasn't just a part of the cycle. She wasn't just another cog in the earth's insatiable hunger. She was more than that. She had to be. "You think you can resist," the woman said, her voice tinged with pity. "But the hunger knows you, Elena. It has always known you." The earth beneath Elena's feet shuddered, sending a tremor through her body. The hunger pulsed within her like a second heartbeat, thrumming in time with the world's rhythm. "You have become the cycle," the woman whispered, her voice now a dark promise. "And the cycle will never let you go." The weight of it crushed Elena's chest. She wanted to fight, to push back against the darkness that was now a part of her, but she couldn't deny it. She could feel it, the pull of the cycle, the earth's hunger, its unyielding thirst for more. The rift was widening beneath her feet, the land opening up like the mouth of a beast ready to consume the world. Elena staggered forward, her body unwilling to move on its own, as though the earth was dragging her along, urging her toward the abyss. Her vision blurred, her head swimming with the overwhelming power that surged through her. Every heartbeat, every breath was one with the earth, one with the cycle, and it wasn't enough. The hunger was insatiable. The cycle was endless. Her feet stumbled, and she fell to her knees, her palms pressing into the dirt. She could feel the pulse of the earth under her skin, each beat resonating through her body, filling her with a crushing sense of inevitability. "You are the earth," the woman's voice whispered again. "You are the keeper. You will lead the cycle." Elena gasped for air, feeling the world spin around her. The hunger was too much. It was inside her, around her, consuming everything. She was drowning in it, suffocating under its weight. And then a thought struck her, sharp, desperate. What if she could stop it? She hadn't surrendered completely. Not yet. The earth's hunger was in her, yes, but it didn't have to control her. She wasn't a vessel for it. She wasn't just a tool. Elena forced herself to focus, gathering all the strength she could muster. She didn't know if it would work, but she had no other choice. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to stop the cycle from consuming everything, she had to break free. She pushed against the earth's pull, her mind focused on the flickering light that had never completely gone out. It was faint, like a star in the distance, but it was still there. The earth trembled beneath her, the hunger roiling like a storm within her body, but Elena fought back. She reached for that light, that small flame of her own humanity, and drew it up from the deepest part of her soul. She clung to it like a lifeline, and then she shouted, "No!" The world around her seemed to break apart. The rift cracked wide open, but Elena didn't fall into it. She pushed back. The hunger roared in fury, but Elena was no longer its servant. She was no longer part of the cycle. She was something more. Her hands glowed with an otherworldly light, and she felt the earth's hunger shudder at the touch of it. For the first time since she had joined the cycle, she felt in control. The power was still there, but she could feel it now, tame it, bend it to her will. She wasn't just a keeper anymore. She was the counterbalance. She was the one who could stop the cycle, who could hold back the hunger. For now, the earth groaned beneath Elena's feet, a deep rumble that sent tremors through her body. The pulse of the world, once a constant, thundering wave of hunger, now felt different, unsettled, as if it were confused by her defiance. She could still feel the hunger, still sense the dark depths of the rift beneath her. But for the first time since her transformation, she didn't feel overwhelmed by it. She wasn't the earth's servant anymore. She was its balance. But how long could she maintain it? The hunger was insidious. It gnawed at the edges of her consciousness, whispering promises of power, of unimaginable strength. Elena could feel it like a pull in the back of her mind. The earth was still waiting for her to submit, to join it completely, to surrender. She couldn't let herself do that. Not again. Elena pressed her palms into the ground, feeling the earth pulse beneath her, like a living creature trying to communicate. The power was so strong, so ancient, and yet there was something more, something deeper, that she couldn't quite understand. Was the earth trying to speak to her, or was it simply trying to claim her once more? She wasn't sure. Elena. The woman's voice was there again, a soft, ethereal whisper that seemed to come from the earth itself. Elena could feel her presence in every crack of the soil, every gust of wind. It was as if the very world was trying to reach her, trying to pull her back into its grasp. Elena, the woman's voice said again, this time more forceful, more insistent. You cannot keep fighting this. You are the cycle. You were always meant to be. No, Elena muttered, shaking her head. She clenched her fists and forced herself to focus. The earth couldn't have her. The rift beneath her feet deepened, widening like a yawning mouth. The earth's hunger rumbled louder, but Elena stood firm. Her hands were still glowing with the strange, otherworldly light, the light she had tapped into, the spark of her humanity that had fought off the darkness. The hunger swelled again, a wave of blackness rising up from the depths of the earth, ready to consume everything in its path. It lashed out, trying to break her, to drown her in its power. But Elena didn't back down. Instead, she focused, gathering the light inside her, feeling it surge to the surface. She had the power to stop this. She had to. She reached out with her mind, pushing back against the wave of hunger, pressing against the rift. The ground quaked. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two forces, her resistance and the earth's hunger, clashed in a violent, electrifying storm. You are the keeper. The woman's voice now rang with anger, her words distorted by the force of the energy around Elena. You will not defy me. Elena gritted her teeth, her hands shaking with the effort of holding the rift back. She could feel the woman's presence pressing against her, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She was not a part of the earth cycle. She had broken free, and she would never be its servant again. But as the hunger surged, something else stirred deep within her, something she hadn't anticipated, a hunger of her own. Her heart raced as the need for power pulsed through her veins. The cycle had claimed her once, and now, as she resisted it, there was a part of her that wanted to give in. The promise of power, the seductive allure of the earth's endless hunger. It was there, and it felt like a whisper in the dark, pulling at her very soul. No, she whispered again, but the voice sounded uncertain this time. Could she resist it? Could she maintain control? Her hands, still glowing, began to burn with heat, the power inside her swirling like a tempest. The earth beneath her feet shifted, its hunger growing, more violent, more desperate. Elena, the woman's voice echoed again, this time filled with disappointment, like the last breath of a dying star. You are the earth's keeper. You belong to it. And Elena, for just a moment, almost believed it. Her hands trembled, and the world seemed to tilt around her. The earth's hunger rose again, a tidal wave of dark power that threatened to swallow everything in its path. But as Elena reached out, her fingers brushing against the soil, she felt something else, a tug at her soul, a whisper in the back of her mind that wasn't the woman's voice. It was her own. The light inside her flared brighter. No, she repeated, her voice now steady, full of determination. She would not give in. She would not be the earth's servant. Not again. The hunger may be part of her, but it was not all of her. With one final surge of will, Elena cast the hunger back, the power of her light pushing against the darkness until the ground beneath her shook. The rift closed, the earth's pulse fading into the distance. And for the first time since her transformation, the world around her seemed to breathe in relief. But Elena knew she wasn't done. She could still feel the hunger, the earth's insatiable appetite, lurking just below the surface. The rift had closed, but it wasn't gone. Not yet. The woman's voice still echoed in her mind, a reminder of the power that was waiting to claim her. Elena's chest heaved as she stood there, shaking, the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She had resisted the cycle for now, but what would happen next? Could she keep the hunger at bay? Was she strong enough to hold her ground? The wind whispered around her, and the earth shifted, its hunger never fully satisfied. The world felt different now, as though a delicate balance had been shifted. Elena could still feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, but it was muted, distant. The hunger, while still there, had receded for the moment. She stood in the clearing, the same place where the cycle had begun, but it felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice. Something had changed. The air around her crackled with energy, and Elena's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. She could still feel the tug of the earth, a magnetic force pulling at her every instinct. The power she had accessed, the light that had surged inside her, was both her salvation and her curse. She wasn't sure how long she could hold the hunger back, or if she even should. A soft rustle of leaves drew her attention, and Elena turned to find a figure stepping from the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the woman who had first brought her into the cycle. The one who had claimed Elena as a keeper, a part of the earth's insatiable hunger. The woman's features were serene, as always, but there was something different about her now, an air of finality, like a storm that was about to break. "Elena," the woman said, her voice like silk, soothing yet sharp with an edge of warning. "You have done well to resist, but this cannot go on forever." Elena's jaw tightened. "I won't be your tool. I won't let you control me." The woman's smile was cold, the curve of her lips as unreadable as the earth itself. "Control? You misunderstand. You are the cycle, Elena. You always have been." "No," Elena said, her voice trembling with the weight of her own conviction. "I've chosen to be something else. I can stop the hunger. I can stop the cycle." The woman's eyes flashed briefly, a crack in her serene exterior, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You are fooling yourself if you think you can truly escape this. The earth does not let go so easily." Elena stepped back, trying to steady her breath, but the pull of the earth was growing again, stronger this time. It wasn't just the hunger, it was the pressure. It was the weight of an ancient, unyielding force that was woven into the very fabric of the world. Her heart raced as the ground beneath her feet trembled. The woman's presence loomed over her, and yet Elena could feel the earth itself bending around her, testing her resolve. "You feel it, don't you?" the woman asked softly. "The rift, the hunger, it wants to claim you again. It always will, and the longer you fight it, the harder it will become to break free. You cannot stop it, Elena. The earth is you." Elena clenched her fists, forcing back the rising tide of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel the darkness stirring within her, the ancient hunger stretching and shifting beneath her skin. The earth was alive with it, its pulse beating in time with her own. But she was not just the earth. "No," Elena whispered again, more firmly this time. "I am not the earth's slave. I am the one who will stop it." The woman's gaze softened, almost pitying, but there was a coldness in her eyes, a knowledge of something Elena had yet to understand. "Then you must understand what you are up against, Elena. The hunger does not simply consume, it changes. It shapes, and once it has tasted your power, it will never let you go." The words hit Elena like a blow, a sharp pain that cut through her chest. She could feel the earth's hunger, that gnawing, insistent need, pressing harder against her. She could feel the cycle closing in, wrapping its tendrils around her, trying to draw her back into its endless loop. "Elena," the woman said softly, taking a step closer. "The longer you resist, the more the earth will reshape you. It will twist your mind, your body, until you become the very thing you fear." Elena felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She could feel the shift, the subtle change in her thoughts, the pull of the hunger gnawing at the edges of her consciousness. She had been fighting for so long, and now it felt like she was starting to lose herself in the process. Was she becoming the cycle? She pressed her hands to her temples, as if trying to hold her thoughts together. She couldn't lose herself. She couldn't become part of the hunger again. The woman was watching her closely, her eyes unblinking, as if waiting for something. Elena felt it then, a tug at the very core of her being. Something deep inside her, something she had been trying to ignore, was rising. The hunger wasn't just external. It was inside her now, woven into her flesh, into her bones. It wasn't just the earth that was pulling her in. It was her own power, the very thing that had made her strong, and now it was turning on her. The hunger wasn't an outside force anymore. It was a part of her. "Why are you doing this?" Elena cried out, her voice raw with emotion. "Why can't I just be free?" The woman didn't answer. She just stood there, waiting, as the earth groaned beneath Elena's feet. The ground shifted, cracks opening in the earth around her. It was like the world itself was trembling in anticipation. Elena could feel the weight of everything bearing down on her. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep fighting, how much longer she could hold on to her humanity. The power, the hunger, it was too much. The cycle wanted her, and the earth was becoming a part of her. "You cannot escape it, Elena," the woman said, her voice a quiet murmur. "Not anymore." With that, the earth surged forward, and the rift beneath Elena's feet widened. The earth trembled beneath Elena's feet, the rift widening, and a heavy silence fell over her. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still, frozen in time. The wind stilled, the trees stopped swaying, even the distant bird song ceased. Elena's breath came in shallow gasps as she looked down at the cracks spreading through the soil, widening like a mouth about to swallow her whole. The power within her, the very thing she had fought to control, began to rise, a burning sensation that made her head spin. It was calling her, the hunger, the earth, her own power. The woman's figure stood at the edge of the clearing, her presence calm and inevitable. Elena could feel her gaze like an anchor, a steady weight in the storm of her thoughts. She knew now that this wasn't just an external force. The cycle wasn't something outside of her. It had always been inside her. "You see," the woman's voice was gentle now, almost a whisper. "The earth is you. The hunger is part of you. All of it. It always has been." Elena clenched her fists, feeling the power swirling within her, dark, insistent, impossible to ignore. No, she wouldn't succumb. She couldn't. She fought to keep the light inside her burning, but it flickered, wavered, as though it were losing strength. The hunger was too strong, like a tide rising against her. It whispered to her, the earth's voice mixing with her own thoughts. "Elena," the woman said again, this time stepping closer, the calmness in her tone betraying the storm that raged inside Elena. "Do you understand now? You were never meant to fight the earth. You are its keeper, its protector. The power you resist is the very thing that sustains you." The ground around Elena cracked wider, and the earth seemed to pulse with hunger, a deep, resonating hum that shook the air. She felt it inside her bones, inside her soul. It wasn't just an external force. It was her essence. She had thought that her humanity, her ability to choose, to fight, to resist, was the core of her being. But now, as the earth clawed at her from within, she realized that the struggle itself had been part of the transformation. She wasn't just Elena anymore. She was part of something older, something that existed beyond her. The woman's voice reached her again, smooth and measured. "You cannot fight this. You are the balance. The hunger will never leave you. It will always be a part of you." Elena's chest tightened, the fear growing. She felt the power rising, an urge to give in, to become one with the earth's endless appetite. She wanted to. The temptation was there, dark and seductive, offering power, strength, and an end to the struggle. But she knew deep down that if she gave in now, it would consume her. It would swallow her whole, and she would become nothing, a part of the cycle forever, never to escape. She stumbled backward, trying to hold on to herself, trying to keep the light alive within her. But it felt weaker now, flickering, as if the earth's hunger was drowning it out. "Elena," the woman said softly, her eyes narrowing, "you cannot escape. The hunger is your birthright." "No," Elena shouted, her voice raw and desperate. "I won't let it take me." The woman's expression softened with something like pity, but there was no sympathy in her eyes. Only a quiet understanding. You have already given yourself to it. You just haven't realized it yet. Elena's heart raced. She wanted to argue, to fight back, but the words felt trapped inside her. Her body ached with the pressure of the earth's hunger, the weight of the rift deepening with each passing moment. She could feel herself unraveling, like the very fabric of her being was being pulled in two directions, toward the earth, toward herself. "No," Elena whispered. Her hands trembled. She could feel the darkness twisting around her, seeping into her thoughts, into her soul. She pressed her hands to her temples, trying to steady her mind, but the images, the visions, came rushing at her. She saw the earth, not just as it was now, but as it had always been. She saw the hunger, the insatiable need of the land, stretching back through time. She saw the cycles, the constant ebb and flow of destruction and rebirth, and she saw herself, a part of it, a keeper of the earth's power. She saw the faces of those who had come before her, all the others who had tried to defy the cycle. Some had failed, lost to the earth's hunger. Some had embraced it, becoming a part of the land, a part of the endless loop. And then she saw something that stopped her heart. She saw herself, no longer Elena. She saw a woman who had become the cycle, a woman who had surrendered to the hunger, who had allowed it to consume her. Her eyes were empty, hollow, her body twisted and contorted, like something not quite human anymore. Elena gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She recognized herself, not in the woman's face, but in the eyes. The hunger had taken over. The earth's hunger had claimed her. "No!" Elena gasped. She shook her head, trying to push the vision away, but it lingered, the dark truth pulling at her heart. She wasn't just resisting the earth. She was fighting herself. "Elena!" The woman's voice echoed once more. "It's already begun." The earth groaned again, louder this time, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very air around her. The rift beneath her feet widened further, and Elena could feel the hunger pulling her, demanding her surrender. The weight of the earth's power pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. The ground around her cracked open, like a gaping mouth, waiting to devour her whole. Elena's hands burned with light, but it flickered weakly, the darkness threatening to extinguish it completely. She had to choose. Now, would she embrace the earth's hunger, let it consume her completely, or would she find another way to resist? The earth groaned again beneath her, the rift widening with an intensity that made Elena's blood run cold. Her thoughts felt clouded, as if the hunger was taking shape inside her, reshaping her very being. She felt it in every fiber of her body, the crushing pull of the cycle, the weight of the ancient hunger that had always lived inside her. No, she had to resist. Elena's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The light inside her flickered, its warmth like a distant star, barely hanging on against the overwhelming darkness that threatened to drown it. She pressed her hands against the growing cracks in the earth, feeling the tremors beneath her feet. The rift was widening faster now, the earth's hunger roaring, pushing against her. But the vision from moments ago, herself, twisted and hollow-eyed, consumed by the hunger, kept playing over and over in her mind. It had felt so real, too real. Was it a warning? A glimpse of what would happen if she allowed the cycle to take her again? Could she stop it? Could she resist the hunger that was deep within her, woven into the very fabric of her being? Her hands were trembling now, her thoughts unraveling. What was left of Elena if she couldn't escape this? Elena, the woman's voice was soft, as if speaking to a child caught in a dream. You were always meant to be part of the earth. The hunger runs through you as surely as blood. You cannot escape it. You have already given yourself to it. Now, you must let go. Let the earth claim you. The words hit Elena like a punch to the gut. They made sense, too much sense. The hunger wasn't an external force. It was her, the power she had fought so hard to control. The same power that had given her strength, was part of the cycle. She had always been a part of it. She had been born into it, but that didn't mean she had to embrace it. It didn't mean she had to become one with it. She couldn't give up. She couldn't give in. "Elena," the woman said again, taking another step closer. "You don't have to fight anymore. The hunger will never leave you. It will only consume you more and more if you keep resisting. The earth is calling you home." The earth rumbled beneath her feet, the power surging up through the cracks, and Elena felt the overwhelming urge to surrender, to let it wash over her. The temptation was so strong. It was like the earth was pulling her toward it with the force of 1,000 storms. She could feel the ancient hunger pulling at her soul, promising her a place in the cycle, a place of power, a place where she could belong. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the hunger, trying to focus on the light that still flickered within her. It was weak, so weak now. She could feel it slipping away, but it was still there, still burning, even if just for a moment longer. No, she wouldn't be consumed. She couldn't. Suddenly, an idea struck her, something she had been trying to ignore. The cycle was not just about destruction. It was about rebirth. The earth had always been in a cycle of death and renewal. The hunger wasn't just about consuming, it was about transformation. Perhaps there was a way to transform this hunger, to shift it into something else, to use the earth's hunger not to devour, but to create. Elena's hands shook as she drew her power to the surface, reaching deep within her, trying to call the light that still flickered within her heart. She could feel the hunger pulling at her, testing her resolve. But she wasn't going to let it take her. Not again. She focused on the power within her, and with every ounce of strength she could muster, she began to channel it outward, shaping it like clay in her hands. She bent the hunger, like a blacksmith shaping molten metal, reshaping its terrible form into something new. "Elena," the woman's voice was almost a whisper now, but it was not one of warning. It was almost admiration. "You are not as helpless as you think." "I'm not helpless," Elena whispered back, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "And I won't be your tool." With all her remaining strength, Elena pressed her hands into the rift in the earth, pouring the power that had been building inside her into the hunger that churned beneath her. The earth shuddered beneath her, the cracks widening even more, but this time, it wasn't an uncontrollable force. She was in control. For the first time since the hunger had taken root in her, Elena felt as though she could shape it, bend it, make it hers. The woman stepped back, her eyes wide with realization. Elena's power was no longer fighting against the earth. It was becoming part of it. The hunger, though still a part of her, no longer had control over her. The ground beneath Elena's feet began to shift, not as a violent quake, but as a quiet, powerful movement, a renewal. The earth seemed to calm, as though it had finally found its balance. For a moment, everything was still. The rift that had once threatened to consume her was now slowly closing, the cracks in the earth healing, the hunger easing. But Elena knew the battle wasn't over. The earth's hunger might have been pushed back for now, but it was still there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to return. "Elena," the woman said, her voice softer, almost reverent. "You have done something I did not expect. You have found a way to bend the hunger, to make it part of you without succumbing to it." Elena took a deep breath, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. But she stood tall, her resolve hardening. "I will not let it control me. I will control it." The woman watched her for a moment longer, before giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Perhaps you are ready then. Perhaps you can be the one to lead this cycle, not as its slave, but as its keeper." Elena shook her head. "No, I'm not a keeper. I'm someone who chooses." The woman's expression softened. "Then choose wisely, Elena. The hunger never truly disappears. It is always there waiting." Elena glanced down at the healed rift beneath her, a reminder of the balance she had just created. The hunger was still a part of her, but it no longer had dominion over her. She could feel the shift, the change she had wrought in herself. It was a beginning, not an end. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt free. The ground was still, the rift now closed. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the Earth's hunger seemed to sleep, its insatiable pull momentarily sated. Elena stood at the center of the clearing, her breath slow and deliberate. The power that had once threatened to overwhelm her was now woven into her being, no longer a force to be feared, but something she could wield. But beneath her newfound strength, the unease lingered. The hunger had not disappeared. It had only changed, become something she could control. For now, the woman who had guided her all this time, whose presence had been both a challenge and a strange comfort, remained silent, watching her with eyes that seemed to see right through her. Elena knew that the woman understood what she was feeling. The cycle, after all, never truly ended. "You've done it," the woman said, her voice soft but edged with something else. "But remember, this is only the beginning." Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the ground beneath her. The earth seemed to hum, its pulse steady, but she could feel the hunger still coiled in the depths, a presence waiting for the right moment to emerge. "How long do I have?" Elena asked, her voice steady but her mind racing. "How long before it returns?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with something like pity. "It never truly leaves. Not completely. You've changed it, yes, but it is part of the Earth's cycle. The hunger will always seek renewal, and it will test you again, when you least expect it." Elena clenched her fists. She didn't want to hear this. She had worked so hard to break free from the cycle, to reshape the hunger, to make it her ally. But the woman was right. The Earth was a living thing, and it was constantly shifting, evolving, hunting. "I'm not afraid," Elena said, more to herself than to the woman. "I will control it. I can control it." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying her. "We shall see, Elena. The Earth has always been unpredictable." As she spoke, Elena felt a flicker, just a flicker, of the power she had bent. Something distant, something ancient, stirred deep within the earth. The ground beneath her feet quivered, the air around her growing heavy, thick with expectation. It came like a whisper at first, quiet, almost imperceptible, but soon enough, it grew louder, more insistent. Voices, deep, low, murmuring in the earth beneath her. Elena's pulse quickened. She felt it before she saw it, the shadow that had always lurked at the edge of her perception. She felt the hunger stirring, creeping up like a tide. But this time, there was something different about it. It wasn't the simple, mindless need she had known before. This was intelligent, focused. She glanced up, her eyes meeting the woman's. The woman's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. The moment felt too heavy, too charged with something Elena couldn't fully understand. The shadows at the edge of the clearing began to shift. Elena's heart pounded harder. She could feel it. Something was watching her. And then they appeared. Figures, dark and ghostly, emerged from the forest surrounding them. Tall, thin shapes cloaked in shadows, their features hidden beneath deep hoods. They moved with a chilling precision, the air around them crackling with a raw, ancient energy. The hunger had not merely returned, it had summoned them. The woman stepped back, her face a mask of resignation. "The Watchers," she whispered. Elena's throat went dry. She had heard the name before, in whispers, in fragments of half-forgotten stories. The Watchers, beings who had existed since the beginning of the cycle. Guardians, yes, but also manipulators. Their purpose had always been unclear, their true motives hidden in the depths of the Earth's hunger. "Who are they?" Elena asked, her voice tight. "The Earth's keepers," the woman replied, her voice heavy with something like fear. "They are bound to the cycle, as you are now. They are not here to help you. They are here to watch, and to ensure that you remain in the cycle." The Watchers moved closer, their long, dark forms casting an eerie shadow across the clearing. Elena could feel their presence now, deep in her bones, like a dark weight pressing down on her chest. They didn't speak, but their gaze, unseen but still felt, seemed to pierce through her, measuring, testing, weighing her. She tried to stand tall, to hold her ground, but the pull of their gaze was like a gravitational force. dragging her deeper into the earth's hunger. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists tighter. "No," Elena whispered, more to herself than to them. "I won't let it happen again. I control the hunger now." One of the watchers stepped forward, its form impossibly tall, draped in shadow, but its presence, was felt deeply, as though it came from both within her and from the very earth beneath her feet. It spoke, its voice a low rumble, like the earth itself had just opened its mouth to speak. "You think you have mastered the hunger?" The voice echoed, resonating in her chest, shaking her to the core. "You think you can control what has always ruled this world? You are nothing but a puppet." Elena's knees buckled slightly, but she steadied herself, breathing through the pressure. "I'm not your puppet. I won't be a part of your cycle anymore." The watcher tilted its head. "You believe you can break free of the Earth's cycle?" Its voice was a mockery now, laced with ancient, unshakable certainty. "You are bound to it, as is all life. You will feed it, and it will feed off you. That is the way of things." Elena could feel the hunger rising again, faster now, more violent than before, as if the earth was enraged by her defiance. She struggled to keep it at bay, to focus on the light within her. She had to believe there was another way. She had to. "Why are you here?" Elena demanded, forcing herself to look up at the watcher. "What do you want from me?" The watcher's lips barely parted, and its voice was like a whisper that rattled her bones. "We are here to remind you. The Earth's hunger is not something to be controlled. It is something to be served." Elena's blood ran cold. She knew what they wanted now. They wanted to break her, to make her surrender, to become part of the cycle again. But Elena wasn't going to let that happen. She had broken free once before, and she would do it again. The hunger in her rose with a new intensity, no longer just a force of destruction. She could feel it pulsing through her, a powerful energy that hummed like a living thing. The earth had its power, but she had her own. With a defiant breath, Elena reached down deep within herself, and with every ounce of strength she had left, she called on the earth's power, not as a slave, but as its equal. The watchers paused, their gazes sharpening, their forms flickering like shadows. "You are stronger than we anticipated," one of them said, its voice strained, as if uncertain. "But remember this, the hunger never truly rests." The ground beneath Elena began to tremble once more. The tremors beneath Elena's feet grew stronger, more violent. The ground cracked again, this time more jagged, as if the earth itself were protesting her defiance. The watchers remained motionless, their shadows long and dark, their presence suffocating. The air had thickened with an oppressive force that pressed against Elena's chest, squeezing the breath from her lungs. She could feel the hunger. It was not just a force of nature anymore. It had become personal. It coursed through her veins, twisting and turning like a wild serpent. She was caught in its current, a thread tangled in the earth's endless pull. But she couldn't surrender. Not again. "Elena," one of the watchers said, its voice low, like the sound of a distant rumble. "You think you can escape the cycle? That you are free from its hold?" The air around Elena felt alive now, crackling with energy. She could see the way the earth seemed to ripple beneath her feet, an unseen force pushing against her. It was the hunger, rising faster and stronger, testing her resolve, forcing her to question if she was truly in control. "I don't belong to the cycle anymore," Elena said through clenched teeth. She could feel the hunger tugging at her, but she refused to let it swallow her whole. "I've chosen a different path." The watcher stepped forward, its tall, imposing form casting a long shadow that engulfed her. Its presence felt like the weight of centuries bearing down on her. "You cannot choose," it intoned, the earth's voice echoing in its tone. "You never truly could. The hunger is not something you choose to fight. It is something you must serve." Elena's hands trembled. She felt the weight of the watcher's words in the pit of her stomach, like an anchor pulling her deeper into the earth. Their power was ancient, woven into the very fabric of the world. They were the keepers of the cycle, the rulers of the hunger. And though she had resisted them, though she had fought to break free, They would not allow her to escape. But she would not give in. The Watcher reached out a long, pale hand toward her, its fingers brushing the air with the stillness of death. You are bound to this world, Elena, as all are. You cannot escape the hunger, nor can you escape the Earth's call. It is inevitable. You will come to serve it again, just as all who have come before you. Elena's breath came quicker, her heart pounding with fear and defiance. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to believe it. She had rejected the cycle once. She could do it again. No, she said, her voice gaining strength. I won't let you take me. With a desperate cry, Elena reached into herself, into the darkness that had once consumed her, and pulled from it the power that had been hiding there. She felt the Earth's hunger churning, turning on itself, becoming something wild and untamed, like a fire she had never dared to control. It burned through her, hot and ferocious, but this time Elena did not fear it. She channeled it, shaped it with every ounce of what she had left, forcing it into a single, focused point. Her body trembled under the strain, but she could feel the hunger bending, obeying her. The Earth trembled, the Watchers watching, their shadowed eyes narrowing in disbelief. Impossible, one of them muttered under its breath. Is it? Elena replied, her voice low and steady. The hunger does not control me. I control it. With a sudden, explosive force, Elena released the power she had gathered. The Earth shuddered violently beneath her, the air vibrating with the intensity of her energy. The rift, the one that had once threatened to swallow her whole, began to break apart again. But this time, it wasn't a destructive rift. This time, the hunger was being redirected, reshaped not to consume, but to heal. The Watchers staggered back, as if they could feel the power she was wielding. One of them, the tallest, raised its hands, as if to call upon some hidden strength, but Elena was faster. She pushed the hunger out with a force that knocked them back. The earth beneath her feet cracked and broke, but the hunger inside her began to bend to her will. The Watchers recoiled, the power of the earth's hunger rising and falling like waves crashing against rocks. Elena was the storm now. The Watchers could not touch her. But the hunger, she felt it deep within her, still a part of her. It was not gone, not yet. She had only temporarily shackled it, bending it to her will. The earth would never truly stop demanding, and neither would the Watchers. The tallest Watcher lowered its hands, staring at Elena with an expression that could have been pity or fear, or perhaps both. You believe you can resist the hunger forever? It asked, its voice cold and heavy with a warning. I don't need forever, Elena said through gritted teeth. I only need now. The ground trembled beneath her once more, but this time, the shaking was not threatening. It was alive, like the earth itself was responding to her defiance, to the way she had changed the hunger. The Watchers stared at her, and for the first time since they had appeared, Elena saw something in their eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. The hunger was no longer a force they could command, not entirely. You are different, the Watcher said, its voice almost grudging. You have found a way to resist, a way to transform the hunger. Elena nodded, her gaze unwavering. I don't have to destroy it. I don't have to be consumed by it. I can use it. I can make it work for me. For a moment, the clearing was silent, save for the sound of the earth shifting beneath them. The Watchers were still, their shadows stretching long across the ground. Finally, the Watcher who had spoken before spoke again. This is not over, Elena. The Earth's hunger will return in ways you cannot foresee. You have only delayed the inevitable. The hunger will call, and you will have to answer, when you least expect it. I'll be ready, Elena said, and when it calls, I will be the one to decide how it is answered. The Watchers were silent for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then, without another word, they began to fade, melting back into the shadows from which they had come. But Elena did not turn away. She stood tall, her fists clenched, her mind resolute. She had won the first battle, but she knew, deep in her heart, that the war was far from over. The hunger would return. The Watchers would return. The cycle would always come for her, testing her, pushing her to the edge of submission. And when it did, Elena would be ready. The days that followed the Watcher's departure were heavy with silence. The hunger had quieted, but only in the way a storm calms before the winds pick up again. Elena could feel it beneath her skin, this constant, gnawing presence, like an ember hidden deep within the earth, smoldering, waiting. Her nights were the hardest. Sleep was fleeting, and when it came, it was full of strange, restless dreams. She would be standing at the edge of the rift again, but now the earth was calling to her, whispering, 1,000 voices echoing through the cracks in the ground. The hunger was there too, slithering beneath her thoughts like an old, familiar beast. In these dreams, she was never alone. There were always eyes watching her, hidden, waiting. Elena tried to push the unease aside as she went about her daily tasks, working the fields near her home, feeding herself and her small flock of animals. Life had to continue, after all, but the world had shifted since the Watcher's appearance. She was no longer a stranger to the hunger. It was a part of her, embedded deep in her soul. Her power over it felt both like a gift and a curse. One morning, as she gathered herbs in the forest near her home, a strange sensation gripped her. It was a feeling she had come to recognize over the past weeks, a tightening of the air, a subtle shift in the rhythm of the earth beneath her feet. She wasn't alone. Elena turned slowly, her heart skipping a beat as she noticed a figure in the distance. Standing at the edge of the trees, a silhouette shrouded in shadow, its form unmistakably familiar. She had seen this presence before. The Watchers had returned, but this time, there was only one. It was tall, like the others, its features cloaked in the same ethereal shadow. As it stepped forward, the air around it seemed to hum, a low vibration that echoed in Elena's bones. She gripped the bundle of herbs in her hands, preparing herself for whatever was to come. "You are still here," Elena said, her voice steady, though a tremor of unease ran through her. "I thought you had gone." The Watcher's form rippled, shifting slightly, as if it was made of smoke and shadows. Its voice was deep and resonant, like the earth's pulse. "You believe you are free," it said, the words like a weight pressing down on her chest. "But you have not escaped. You cannot escape." "I told you," Elena replied, her voice sharp now. "I control the hunger. I will not be your puppet. Not again." The Watcher tilted its head, its hidden eyes piercing through her. "You misunderstand. It is not about control. It is about the balance." Balance. Elena's brows furrowed. The hunger is not a balance. It is destruction. The Watcher stepped closer, its form darkening, becoming more solid. The hunger is not merely destruction. It is creation. It is the force that sustains all things, even as it consumes them. The cycle must be maintained, or everything falls into chaos. Elena took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. "I won't let it consume me again. I won't be part of that cycle." "You do not have a choice." The Watcher's voice was cold now, unyielding. "The hunger is part of you. You are bound to it, just as all living things are bound to the earth." Elena's throat tightened, a sense of dread crawling up her spine. She could feel it, the hunger stirring again, beneath the surface, pushing against her control. "You think you are stronger than the hunger, but you are merely its vessel," the Watcher continued, its voice almost like a whisper now, as if the words were meant to burrow into her mind. "You cannot contain it forever. It will break you." The words hit her like a blow. Elena's knees buckled slightly, but she stood tall. The Watcher was testing her, trying to undermine her resolve. "I won't let you manipulate me," Elena said, her voice fierce, but the hunger was growing inside her, pushing back against her will. It was like a dark tide, pulling her under. "You will," the Watcher replied, a faint, almost mocking tone in its voice. "All things bend to the cycle, eventually. You are no different." Elena's breath quickened, and the hunger inside her began to rise. But this time, there was something different about it. It wasn't as wild, as feral as before. This time, the hunger felt controlled, like it was listening to her, responding to her own inner conflict. The Watcher's form flickered, as if it could sense the shift in her. You are not the one in control, Elena. You are merely holding back what is inevitable. The Earth will reclaim you, as it reclaims all things. But Elena's mind was already racing, the hunger calling to her, urging her to surrender, to accept its dominance once again. I don't need the cycle, she whispered, her voice shaking but steady. I can bend it. I can change it. For a brief moment, there was silence. The Watcher did not move, and Elena's thoughts raced as she wrestled with the hunger inside her. She felt the earth beneath her feet, its pulse quickening, in tune with her own heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing. She could feel the hunger, yes, but this time it was different. The hunger did not seek to consume her. It had become a part of her. The Watcher's voice broke through her concentration, a low, warning tone. You think you can change the cycle? Do you not understand? The hunger will consume you whether you wish it or not. But Elena did understand. The hunger was not an external force. It was inside her, and she had found a way to control it, not by fighting it, but by embracing it. I won't let you drag me back into the cycle, she said, her voice clear and strong, her hands steady as she held the Earth's energy within her. The Watcher's form wavered again, as if caught between worlds. It raised its hands slowly, its fingers like tendrils reaching toward her. You are foolish to resist. You are still bound to the hunger. And when the Earth calls again, you will answer. I will answer on my own terms, Elena replied firmly. The cycle does not own me. The Watcher did not respond. It simply stood there, silent, watching her with those unseen eyes. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it stepped back, its form flickering like a shadow at the edge of her perception. You are stronger than we expected, the Watcher said, its voice distant now, as if it were already fading away. But you are still bound. You will see. The hunger will return. Elena's breath was heavy as she watched the Watcher retreat into the forest, its form disappearing as if it had never been there at all. The hunger still pulsed inside her, a reminder of the battle that was far from over. But for now, Elena had won, and that was enough. The days following the Watcher's departure were eerily quiet. The hunger, though still lurking within her, seemed to settle into a strange kind of stillness. Elena went about her life with an intensity she had never felt before. Her senses were sharpened. Her connection to the earth deepened in ways she couldn't entirely explain. It was as if the world itself had opened to her, revealing its secrets. But there was a price. Every evening, as she worked in the fields or sat by the fire, the hunger would rise within her again, subtle but persistent. It would coil like smoke, winding through her thoughts, demanding attention. Elena had learned to control it for the moment, but she couldn't forget the warning of the Watchers. She had learned to harness the power, to bend the hunger to her will. But the truth was she didn't fully understand it. She didn't know its limits, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in a soft crimson light, Elena stood alone in the clearing by her home. She closed her eyes, focusing inward, feeling the hunger rise slowly, like a wave lapping at the shore. This was her test. Could she continue to control it, or would it overwhelm her? A ripple in the air made her open her eyes. The temperature around her dropped, the wind picking up in a sudden gust. She felt the shift before she saw it, the shadow, the figure that had appeared once before, always lurking just at the edge of her awareness. A figure that was now fully formed in front of her. It was the Watcher, but this time it was not alone. Elena. The Watcher spoke, its voice deeper than before, as though it had grown stronger. You think you've mastered it, the hunger, the power inside you, but you have only scratched the surface. Elena's chest tightened, her hands clenched at her sides. I told you already, I'm not going back. I won't be part of your cycle. The Watcher's form shimmered, its dark silhouette blending with the night. You misunderstand. You are not part of the cycle. Elena, you are the cycle. The words sent a cold shiver down her spine. For a moment, Elena couldn't speak. The air seemed to freeze around her, the earth beneath her feet holding its breath. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Watcher stepped closer, its presence suffocating. "You do not just control the hunger. You are the hunger. It is inside you, shaping you, just as it shapes the world. The earth is alive, Elena. It lives and breathes in cycles. It destroys to create. And you're no different. You think you have power over it, but you are simply a vessel for its will." A sickening realization sank into Elena's gut. The Watcher's words had been true. She wasn't just resisting the hunger. She had become an instrument of it. Her defiance had only momentarily slowed the cycle's course, but she was bound to it all the same. The hunger was as much a part of her as the earth beneath her feet. "You were chosen for this," the Watcher continued, its voice now a low, almost soothing murmur. "You are always meant to be its keeper, its vessel. There is no escaping the cycle. Hunger will consume you." Elena's pulse quickened. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "No," she gasped, the weight of its words crushing her. "I've changed. I won't be your pawn." The Watcher tilted its head, a hint of amusement flickering in its unseen eyes. "You cannot change what you are, Elena. You are bound to the Earth's will, just as all life is. And when the hunger calls, you will answer. It will come to you in many forms, in many ways, but it will always be there." Elena closed her eyes, her mind whirling. The hunger was always with her. It had never truly gone away. She had controlled it, yes, but she could feel it pressing against the edges of her consciousness. And now, the Watcher was telling her that it wasn't just something she could push away. It was inside her. It was her. Her hands trembled as she clenched them into fists. "I don't want to be this. I don't want to be you." The Watcher's voice softened, almost pitying. "You're already more like me than you realize." Suddenly, Elena felt the ground beneath her tremble. The earth seemed to pulse, a deep rumble that vibrated through her bones. The hunger inside her stirred, restless and eager. "No!" Elena gasped, struggling to push it back down, to regain control. "This isn't me. This is not me." The Watcher raised a hand, and the earth's rumble grew louder, shaking the trees and the ground around them. Elena staggered, her body fighting the pull of the hunger inside her. The Watcher's hand glowed faintly, like the pulse of the earth itself, and Elena felt the hunger surging within her, threatening to overwhelm her once again. "You cannot escape it," the Watcher said, its voice growing more insistent. "The earth will claim you. You cannot resist what you are. You are the hunger." Elena fell to her knees, her body shaking with the force of the hunger within her. It was overwhelming, suffocating, a dark force that threatened to swallow her whole. She could feel it clawing at her, pulling at her thoughts, her emotions, her very being. "No!" Elena whispered, tears stinging her eyes as she fought against the tide of darkness. "I won't let it consume me." The Watcher's figure loomed over her, its form impossibly tall, casting a long shadow over the clearing. "You are the earth's hunger, Elena. You will always be one with it." The hunger surged again, and this time, Elena couldn't push it back. It crashed through her, like a wave breaking over the shore. She screamed, not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of it, the fear that she was losing herself. And in that moment, she realized she was the hunger. It was not something that could be controlled or denied. It was a part of her, just as much as her soul, her blood. It would consume her, whether she liked it or not. But in that moment of realization, something within Elena shifted. She didn't have to fight it. She didn't have to resist it. She could accept it, embrace it, and make it her own. Her body relaxed just slightly. The hunger inside her did not fade, but it aligned with her will, a force she no longer feared. The Watcher's eyes, though hidden, seemed to study her in silence. "Elena," it said again, its voice low, almost a reverent whisper. "You are not like the others." Elena's breath slowed. She had embraced the hunger. It was no longer a force to be fought. It was a force she would shape, wield, and control. She would use it, and she would become something more than the Watchers ever expected. "I am not like the others," Elena said softly, rising to her feet. Her voice rang with newfound clarity. "And I will never be." The following days passed in a haze of quiet intensity. Elena had learned to coexist with the hunger. It no longer felt like an alien force struggling to control her. Instead, it had become a part of her, a rhythm she could now feel and understand. She no longer fought against it. She listened to it, and in return, it seemed to listen to her. Her connection to the earth deepened in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the hunger that had changed. Her senses were sharper, more attuned to the land around her. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, its heartbeat in sync with her own. The wind, the soil, the trees, they all spoke to her now, sharing their secrets in whispers that only she could understand. But despite this connection, Elena could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had accepted the hunger, but at what cost? She spent the next few days experimenting with her abilities. The first time she reached out to the earth, her hands hovering just above the soil, the ground responded instantly. Roots twisted and coiled around her fingers, the soil shifting as though it were alive. The hunger thrummed within her, guiding her movements. She tried to shape the earth, forming a mound of dirt into a small sculpture. The earth complied, molding itself at her will. But as she did, she felt the hunger grow, pressing against her consciousness like a dark wave, demanding more. Elena pulled her hands back sharply. The hunger surged inside her, but she caught it this time, reining it in, forcing it to obey. She could control it, but just barely. The price was becoming clear. The more she used her power, the stronger the hunger became, twisting its way into her thoughts, urging her to take more, to give in, to consume. As the days passed, Elena began to notice subtle changes. Her skin felt tighter, as if it were stretching to accommodate the power now coursing through her veins. Her eyes had begun to glow faintly in the dark, a faint, otherworldly light that she couldn't explain. Her reflection in the water seemed sharper, more intense, like she was becoming something other. She had heard the rumors in town, the whispers about people who had once dabbled in the old ways, the forgotten magic. They said it changed them. They said it took something from them, something they could never get back. Elena hadn't paid much attention to those stories before, but now they haunted her. One evening, she stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the darkening woods. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came before a storm. Elena felt it in her bones, the hunger stirring, pushing against her control. She had promised herself that she would never give in to it again, that she would control it, bend it to her will. But the temptation was always there, always waiting. She could feel it like a pulse in her chest, a hunger that had taken root deep within her soul. As she stood there, lost in thought, she felt the familiar ripple in the air, a presence. She turned sharply, her pulse quickening. The Watcher. It stepped out from the shadows of the trees, its form as dark and indistinct as before. But this time there was a subtle difference. The Watcher seemed smaller somehow, as if it was losing its substance, its presence shifting in and out of reality. "You've embraced it," the Watcher said, its voice as hollow and distant as ever. "I knew you would. You were always bound to the hunger." Elena felt the hunger surge within her, responding to the Watcher's presence. Her hands clenched at her sides, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I've accepted it," she said, her voice steady. "I've made it my own." The Watcher tilted its head, its form rippling like water, disturbed by a stone. "You think you control it, but the hunger will control you. You have only just begun to understand what you've unleashed." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. "I won't let it consume me. I will control it." "Control?" The Watcher's voice was low, almost amused. "You cannot control what is already a part of you. You think you are stronger than the hunger, but you are merely its vessel. And a vessel can only hold so much before it breaks." The word stung more than she cared to admit, but Elena didn't flinch. "I am not a vessel. I am its master." The Watcher's dark form flickered. You believe that, don't you? But the hunger has its own will, and it will not be ignored. Elena narrowed her eyes. Then I'll bend it to my own will. I won't be a pawn in your cycle. The Watcher was silent for a long moment, studying her. You have always been more powerful than you realized, but power has its price. Elena felt the hunger roil inside her, twisting, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. Her hands clenched tighter, her nails digging into her palms. The price, the Watcher continued, is your humanity. The words hit Elena like a blow. Her breath caught in her throat, the hunger surging violently inside her. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and she could feel the earth shifting, as if it were responding to her inner turmoil. I don't understand, Elena whispered, her voice shaking. What do you mean? The hunger does not just consume the world around you, the Watcher said. It consumes you, piece by piece, bit by bit, every time you call upon it. Every time you wield its power, you lose a part of yourself. Your humanity, your soul. It is the price you pay for this power. Elena staggered back, her mind reeling. The hunger had always been a force she could control, a part of her. But what if it was true? What if, with every passing day, she was becoming something less than human? The hunger surged again, sharp and insistent, and Elena fought it back. But for the first time, it felt harder, as if it were pushing against her, trying to break free. She could feel its dark weight pressing against her mind. Do you see now? The Watcher's voice was cold, like ice on her skin. The price of power is not just the land. It is you, and you will not be the same again. There is no turning back. Elena stood frozen, the hunger rising within her, the Watcher's words sinking into her bones. The earth trembled beneath her feet, the world around her whispering a warning she couldn't ignore. Was she already too far gone? The hunger inside Elena had become a constant companion, always lurking just beneath the surface, ready to surface at the slightest provocation. She could feel it growing stronger with every passing day, twisting her thoughts, stretching her will. It was no longer just a force she controlled. It was a part of her, a deep-rooted part of her very essence. She could hear it in the whispers of the wind, the rustle of the leaves, the hum of the earth itself. It was as if the hunger had merged with the world around her, feeding off the land, feeding off her. The Watcher's words echoed in her mind, growing louder with each passing moment. The price of power is not just the land. It is you, and you will not be the same again. There is no turning back. Elena stood in the clearing at dusk, staring at the horizon, but her mind was elsewhere. Her skin felt stretched too tight, her thoughts tangled in the hunger that coiled within her. She clenched her fists at her sides, trying to hold on to the thread of control she still had. For a brief moment, Elena thought of the people she had left behind in the village, her friends, her family. They would never understand. The hunger, the power, the transformation, none of it could be explained, not in words that would make sense to them. They would see only a monster, and maybe that's what she was becoming. The thought stirred something cold within her chest. A rustle in the underbrush interrupted her thoughts. Elena's head snapped to the side, her senses already on high alert. She felt the earth vibrate beneath her feet, a tremor she recognized instantly. The hunger was rising again, unbidden, unrelenting. She exhaled sharply, trying to steady herself, but it was too late. The hunger surged inside her, twisting her insides like a vice. She couldn't hold it back. Not anymore. Before she could react, the figure of the Watcher emerged from the shadows. Its form was more solid this time, its edges sharper, more defined. It was as if the Watcher had come to witness her descent into darkness, no longer a passive observer, but a guide. Elena, the Watcher's voice came, its tone even more distant and hollow than before. You feel it, don't you? The hunger is no longer a choice. It is a part of you. Elena's breath quickened, her vision narrowing. She could hear the beating of her heart in her ears, louder and louder. The hunger inside her flared, burning hot and insatiable. I know what I've become, Elena said, her voice strained. But this power is mine. I control it. I won't let it take me. You think you have control, the Watcher replied, its voice carrying a faint edge of amusement. But the hunger is not something you control. It controls you. The hunger pressed at her from every direction, clawing at her consciousness, filling her veins with a frantic energy. She could feel the land shifting beneath her feet as if the earth itself was resonating with her inner turmoil. I will not let it consume me, Elena said again, though her voice was beginning to shake with uncertainty. The Watcher took a step forward, its dark presence suffocating the air around them. You cannot avoid it. It is a part of the world, just as the earth is. Just as you are. The Watcher's form flickered and then solidified, the air thick with the sound of distant whispers. Every moment you use this power, every moment you give in, you lose a piece of yourself. The hunger will consume you, Elena. It will devour everything you were until only the hunger remains. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes wild with fear and defiance. No, I won't let it. But before she could finish, the ground beneath her feet erupted in a violent tremor. The earth cracked, and deep fissures appeared in the soil, reaching out toward her like hungry hands. The hunger inside her howled, surging to the surface, demanding release. Elena cried out in agony, her body shaking as the hunger threatened to overwhelm her. Her limbs felt heavy, her bones creaking with the weight of it. She stumbled back, barely keeping herself on her feet, as the hunger clawed at her insides, tearing at her will. I can't. Elena gasped, her voice breaking. I can't fight it anymore. It's too strong. The Watcher stepped closer, its presence swallowing the space around them. It was no longer distant. It was right there with her, standing in the shadow of her descent. You don't fight it, Elena. You accept it, you embrace it, or you will be torn apart by it. Elena's vision blurred, and she stumbled to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The hunger inside her was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar, a relentless force that surged through her, coursing through her veins like molten fire. It was too much. She couldn't contain it. And yet, a part of her refused to surrender. Elena, the Watcher said softly, its voice almost compassionate. You were always destined for this. The hunger has always been a part of you. You are the Earth's hunger, just as I am. You cannot escape it. Elena's chest heaved as she fought against the tide of darkness that threatened to swallow her whole. The ground trembled again, and she could feel the Earth's pull beneath her, coaxing her to give in, to let the hunger consume her completely. But as the hunger reached out for her, something shifted. A flash of clarity pierced through the fog of her thoughts. Elena's eyes widened as she realized what the Watcher had been trying to tell her. She wasn't just a vessel for the hunger. She was its master. With every ounce of strength she had left, Elena forced herself to her feet. She gripped the earth beneath her, her fingers digging into the soil, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her fingertips. The hunger surged, but this time, she didn't fight it. She welcomed it. For the first time, Elena let the hunger fill her. The air crackled with energy as the earth beneath her responded, the tremors growing in intensity. The hunger surged, but Elena controlled it, guided it, bending it to her will. She could feel its power coursing through her like an electric current, and instead of resisting, she surrendered to it. The Watcher watched in silence as Elena stood tall, her body glowing with an otherworldly energy. The hunger no longer overwhelmed her. It was hers to command, hers to shape. The Watcher's form flickered again, as if it was fading. So, it is true. You are the master of the hunger, not its servant. Elena's voice was steady, but her eyes glowed with an inner fire. I am both, and I will use it as I see fit. Days passed in a blur. Elena had learned to live with the hunger, but the more she controlled it, the more it grew. It was no longer something that whispered in the back of her mind. It had become a symbiotic part of her, a living, breathing entity within her very being. It pulsed with a rhythm, like the beating of her heart, a constant, demanding presence that could not be ignored. The hunger fed off the land, and in turn, It made her feel more connected to the earth than ever before. The boundaries between herself and the land blurred, as if she and the world had become one. The trees, the soil, the sky, they all seemed to speak to her in ways she never thought possible. They spoke in feelings, vibrations, and subtle shifts in the air. The hunger was not just a force of destruction, it was a force of creation. But with this power came an undeniable truth. Elena could feel the earth suffering. The hunger within her was not just drawing from the land, it was feeding on it, leaving behind scars. The soil beneath her feet grew thinner, weaker. The once vibrant forest surrounding her home began to wither, its leaves turning brittle and falling to the ground like ash. She had ignored it at first, too caught up in the rush of power that coursed through her veins. But as the days wore on, she couldn't deny the toll the hunger was taking. The land was sick. Elena sat on a large rock at the edge of the clearing, staring out at the fading forest. Her fingers rested lightly on the stone beside her, the hunger thrumming beneath her skin. She felt the pull of it, the desire to reach out and feed once more. It called to her like a siren's song, a deep, aching yearning that she could not ignore. The hunger whispered, urging her to take more, to draw more from the earth. And for a moment, Elena considered it. The temptation was strong, the power within her so close to the surface, ready to burst forth. But then the image of the dying trees flashed before her eyes. The land around her had begun to suffer, its once rich vitality slipping away as she fed. She could hear the groans of the earth, its protests growing louder with each passing day. The hunger will consume everything, the Watcher had said, and she could feel it now. She had been feeding on the land, taking without thinking of the cost. She wasn't just feeding the hunger, she was feeding a cycle of destruction. Her chest tightened, guilt seeping in. Elena rose from the rock, her mind spinning with thoughts of what to do next. The hunger was a part of her now, but it was clear that she couldn't continue this way, taking without giving back, feeding without understanding the cost. The hunger stirred inside her, restless. She could feel the earth beneath her feet calling to her. It was the land. It needed her. The land needed to heal, to be nourished once again, or else it would wither and die. But how could she stop? The hunger was insatiable. It demanded more, and there was only so much of herself she could give. The wind suddenly stirred around her, a sharp gust that rattled the branches of the trees. Elena turned her head, her gaze locking onto the clearing ahead. In the distance, a figure stood at the edge of the woods, watching her silently. The Watcher. Its form was indistinct, its presence looming like a dark cloud. It hadn't come this close before. Elena, the Watcher's voice broke the silence, carrying on the wind. I see you're beginning to understand. The hunger does not simply consume the world around you, it consumes you. Elena didn't speak. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on the Watcher. The hunger stirred restlessly inside her, but she fought to keep it contained. The Watcher stepped forward, its form flickering in and out of reality, as if it were both present and absent all at once. You feel it, don't you? The land is dying. Elena, it is calling to you. I know, Elena whispered, her voice tight with frustration. But I don't know what to do. The hunger, it won't let me stop. I try, but it pulls me back in every time. The Watcher's gaze seemed to deepen, its form flickering as if it were observing her very soul. The hunger is not your enemy, Elena. It is a part of you. It has always been a part of you, but you cannot let it control you. Elena's breath caught. How do I stop it? How do I? You must sacrifice, the Watcher interrupted, its voice heavy with an unspoken truth. The land needs to be healed, but it cannot be healed without cost. You cannot simply take from it. You must give. Elena frowned, her heart pounding in her chest. Give? How? What can I give? The Watcher's eyes seemed to grow colder, its form rippling like a dark cloud caught in a storm. You must give what you've taken. Return the hunger to the earth. Only then can the cycle be broken. Elena's knees buckled slightly, the weight of the Watcher's words crashing down on her. She understood what it was asking. To heal the land, she would have to sacrifice the very hunger that had become a part of her. The hunger stirred in protest, thrashing against the confines of her mind, but Elena silenced it, forcing herself to focus. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her thoughts spinning in a desperate whirl. Is there no other way? Elena asked, her voice trembling. Must I give it all back? The Watcher's form grew even darker, the shadows deepening. The earth demands balance, and balance can only be achieved through sacrifice. The hunger you carry is not meant to remain within you. It was always meant to return to the earth. Elena stood in silence, her mind racing. The hunger still gnawed at her, but she could feel something else, a resistance, a part of herself that did not want to let go. The thought of giving up the power she had fought so hard to gain, of returning the hunger to the earth, it felt like a death sentence. But deep down, she knew the truth. The land would not survive unless she released it, unless she fed the earth with the very thing she had taken from it. Do it, the Watcher said softly, before it's too late. Elena nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling heavily in her chest. She closed her eyes, feeling the hunger stir within her once more. But this time, she did not resist. Instead, she focused on it. She reached into herself, letting the hunger rise within her. But this time, she did not draw from it. She released it, letting it flow back into the earth. The ground trembled beneath her, a deep, guttural sound rising from the depths of the earth as if the land itself was awakening. The hunger, once a part of her, surged outward, returning to the soil, to the roots, to the air. The land drank it in, its thirst endless. And as the hunger left her, Elena felt something else, a sense of peace. The gnawing, the ache had faded, and with it, she felt the earth heal beneath her feet. The earth was still. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Elena felt silence. The hum of the hunger had faded, leaving behind only a fragile stillness, as if the world were holding its breath. Her fingers hovered above the soil, feeling the pulse of life beneath her, slower now, but steady. The land was healing, slowly, as it absorbed what she had returned. But Elena knew the truth. It wasn't just the land that needed healing. She stumbled back, her knees buckling as the weight of the moment crashed down on her. The hunger had been a part of her, like a shadow, a constant presence. Now that it was gone, she felt empty, hollow, as if something inside her had been ripped out, and in its place was a void she didn't know how to fill. She pressed her hands to her chest, her breath ragged as she struggled to keep herself upright. The silence around her was deafening, and it left her feeling more isolated than ever. She had been so focused on the hunger that she hadn't thought of what would happen once it was gone. What had she become without it? The world around her had started to heal, but the consequences of her actions still hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. A crackling sound reached her ears. Elena's heart skipped in her chest as she turned toward it. There, in the distance, stood a figure, a silhouette against the setting sun. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a Watcher. Elena stood frozen, unsure whether it was a vision or something real. Her hand trembled as she reached out, as if to touch the air, to see if the figure would vanish like a dream. But it didn't. It was real. The Watcher stepped forward, its form growing clearer with every passing second. Its dark presence still filled the space, but there was something different about it now. It wasn't as distant as before. The Watcher's form seemed to pulse with an energy that matched the steady rhythm of Elena's own breath. "You've done it," the Watcher said, its voice low and echoing through the quiet. "You have given the hunger back to the earth." Elena's voice was weak. "I had no choice. The land, it was dying. I had to." "You think you've restored balance?" The Watcher's eyes glowed faintly, its gaze piercing. "You have returned the hunger to the earth. Yes, but you have left a hole, an emptiness. The land is healed, but you." The Watcher's words trailed off, its expression unreadable. "I don't feel whole," Elena whispered, her voice cracking. I thought it would feel like relief. But it's worse. It's like a part of me is missing, and I can't fill the space." The watcher seemed to study her for a moment, its gaze searching. Then it spoke again, softer this time, as if speaking to something hidden within her. The hunger was never just a force. It was a part of you, yes, but it also shaped you. It forged your strength, your power. And now, that power is gone. Elena's chest tightened, her heart aching. But I didn't want to hurt the land. I didn't want to destroy it. You didn't know what you were doing, the watcher said, its voice turning almost pitying. But you have learned, and now you must learn to live with what you've done, not just to the earth, but to yourself. Elena looked down at her hands, empty now. The hunger, the power, it was all gone. She could still feel the faint echoes of its presence, like a shadow lingering in the back of her mind, but it was distant, fading. She felt exposed, fragile. The watcher stepped closer, its form shifting slightly, as if it were preparing to leave. The land will heal, Elena, but you must now heal yourself. But how? Elena's voice trembled. How do I heal when I don't even know who I am without it? The watcher paused for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Then, with a final, slow movement, it turned its back to her, fading once more into the shadows of the trees. Its words hung in the air, faint but clear. You will learn, in time, just as the land learns to recover, so too must you. Elena watched the watcher disappear, her mind still reeling with its words. She was alone now, completely alone. She stood in the middle of the forest, surrounded by the remnants of the hunger, the scars it had left behind. The trees around her were beginning to sprout new leaves, green and fresh, but the earth still felt unsettled. She was unsettled. Elena had returned the hunger to the earth, thinking it would heal everything, but it hadn't healed her. The void inside her, the emptiness left by the loss of the hunger, was overwhelming. She hadn't known how much she had relied on it, how much it had defined her, until it was gone. She took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs. The silence seemed louder than ever, and it echoed the hollowness inside her. But as she stood there, the faintest tremor beneath her feet caught her attention. It wasn't the hunger this time. It was something else. The land shifted again. The trees above her groaned, their branches creaking in the wind. The air felt heavier, and a dark energy began to stir beneath the surface, something that Elena couldn't ignore. Elena's heart raced, and she could feel the air growing thicker, heavier, as if something ancient was waking, something buried deep within the earth. It wasn't the hunger, but it was just as powerful, just as insistent. It was a different kind of force, one that had been waiting for this moment. Elena stepped back, her pulse quickening as the ground beneath her feet trembled once again. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew one thing for certain. The land was not done with her yet. The emptiness she felt inside her began to pulse, a reflection of the dark energy beginning to rise. She wasn't sure how much of it was herself, and how much was the land, but she felt it, felt the call. She was no longer sure whether she was running from it, or if the land was calling her to embrace it. The tremor beneath Elena's feet grew stronger, the ground shifting like the pulse of some ancient beast. The wind whipped around her, catching the leaves in chaotic spirals. The trees groaned as if they too were uneasy, their roots trembling in the deep soil. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Elena's heart raced. She had returned the hunger to the land, believing it would heal the scars she had created. But now, something far darker stirred beneath the surface, and the land was changing in ways she didn't understand. The air had turned thick, as though something ancient was waking from a long, slumbering rest. She felt the ground shift again. The pulse, this new presence, was unmistakable. It was not the hunger that had once thrummed within her. No, this was something more primal, something older. It was a force she had never known, but it was undeniable. The earth beneath her feet cracked open with a deafening roar. A jagged fissure split the ground, and from within it, a low rumble filled the air, vibrating through her very bones. The trees bent, their branches reaching out as if trying to escape, but it was no use. The earth itself was awake, and whatever was coming from below was beyond their control. Elena stumbled back, her mind racing. She had to leave. She had to run. The Watcher's words echoed in her mind. The land will heal, but you must heal yourself. But there was no healing in the face of this. Whatever this was, it was not something she could escape. The air turned colder, and the forest grew darker, the once vibrant green fading to a sickly hue. A figure emerged from the crack in the earth, a towering shape cloaked in shadow. It was not human. It was something far older, its form obscured by the darkness that seemed to seep from it like oil. The earth around it seemed to bend and distort, as if it were being sucked into the figure's presence. Elena stood frozen, fear locking her limbs. The figure's eyes glowed like molten gold, burning through the shadows, and she could feel its gaze settle upon her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. The ground trembled once more, and the figure spoke, its voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to resonate from deep within the earth itself. Elena, it said, its tone both familiar and alien. You have returned what was taken, but it is not enough. The voice was unsettling, as though it spoke not with words, but with the very essence of the earth. Elena's throat tightened, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Who are you? She demanded, though the question sounded weak in her own ears. What do you want? The figure's laugh was a deep, resonant sound that seemed to shake the very trees. I am the earth's heart, it intoned, each word carrying weight, as if the very foundation of the land were speaking through it. I am the source of the hunger, you know, but I am not the hunger itself. I am the root, the origin of all that has been, all that will be, and now you have awoken me. Elena's mind spun. The earth's heart? She had never heard of such a thing. Was it connected to the hunger? Was it what had been whispering to her all this time? The figure seemed to step forward, its massive form shifting and warping with every movement. The ground beneath Elena's feet cracked wider, and she stumbled backward, her legs failing her as panic set in. No, she whispered. I didn't mean to, I only wanted to heal it, to fix what I'd done. The earth's heart moved closer, its eyes burning with an intensity that sent ice through her veins. You cannot fix what has been broken, Elena, it said, its voice growing louder, reverberating like thunder. The hunger you released, it is a reflection of me, a child if you will, but it was not the whole. It was never the whole, and now that it is returned to me, I will consume. I will grow. In you. You will help me. Elena's pulse raced, her limbs trembling with fear. She had thought the hunger was the source, the end of the cycle. But this was something entirely different. This was something far more dangerous. You've fed me. The earth's heart continued, its form shimmering with a dark energy. But it is not enough. The hunger must be fed again, and only you can offer it the nourishment it craves. Elena's throat closed as she stumbled backward, her eyes locked on the massive figure. There was no escaping it. The earth itself had claimed her, and now the very land was turning against her. The hunger was returning, not the hunger she had once controlled, but something far more insidious. No! Elena's voice was a ragged whisper, torn between fear and defiance. I won't help you. I won't let you destroy everything again. The earth's heart tilted its head, as if considering her words. Then, with a low rumble, it extended one massive hand toward her. You have no choice, it said simply. You have already taken what is mine. Now you will give it back. A sharp pain exploded in Elena's chest, and she gasped, her breath faltering. It was as if the earth itself had reached into her, its tendrils of power sinking deep into her veins. She felt the hunger stir within her once more, but it was different now. It was bigger, more powerful than anything she had ever known. The hunger was no longer a part of her. It had taken over, consumed her. No, she whispered again, but this time it was a plea, not a command. I can't. You can, the earth's heart said, its voice now vibrating in her bones. And you will. You are mine now. You are the vessel. You are the one who will feed me. Elena collapsed to her knees, her body convulsing as the hunger, the earth's hunger, surged through her. The land screamed, and Elena screamed with it. She could feel the dark energy of the earth's heart reaching into her, pulling at every fiber of her being, trying to consume her soul. The air grew thick with shadows, the world around her beginning to warp. The earth itself had become a living thing, its hunger ever growing, and Elena could feel it deep in her chest, gnawing at her, as if it was claiming her, mind and body, for its own. And yet, even as the hunger spread like fire through her veins, Elena realized with a sickening certainty that there was no escape. The hunger she had feared, the one she had returned to the earth, was now hers again. But this time, it was more than she could ever have imagined. The earth was calling to her once more, and this time, it was a command. Elena's mind was a whirlwind of chaos, thoughts clashing like storm-tossed waves. She could feel it now, the hunger clawing at her from within, crawling under her skin like insects. It was inside her, its twisted energy spreading through her veins, pulling her in every direction. She couldn't escape it. She couldn't outrun it. The earth's heart stood before her, watching, waiting. Its molten eyes burned through her, its presence heavy, suffocating. She could hear its low, rumbling voice echoing in the back of her mind, urging her to embrace it. "You are mine." Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She tried to force herself to stand, but the hunger within her was relentless, a monstrous force she had no control over. It was feeding on her, using her as a vessel to gain strength, to rise once more. "No," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I won't do it." The earth trembled beneath her feet, and the sky above darkened, swirling with clouds that seemed to mirror the turmoil in her soul. She could feel the earth's heart reaching out for her, its roots of power digging deep into the earth, coiling around her like chains. "You will feed me, Elena," the earth's heart's voice vibrated through her bones. "The hunger is you. You cannot resist." She clenched her fists, the force of the hunger coursing through her, as if it were calling her name. Every breath felt like fire, every heartbeat a drumbeat of destruction. The hunger wasn't just a thing she could banish. It was part of the land, part of the world. The earth's heart had made that clear. "You will give me what I need," it continued, its voice growing darker, more forceful. "You cannot deny your nature. The hunger is your purpose." Elena's mind screamed in resistance, but her body betrayed her. The power within her, the hunger that had been so familiar, began to whisper to her once more. Only this time, it wasn't begging for release. It was demanding sustenance, craving more. She felt the earth shift again, and the trees around her seemed to groan, their branches twisting and writhing as if responding to some unseen call. The land was alive with the hunger, and it was spreading, infiltrating the very soil beneath her. Elena's knees buckled, her head spinning. The air grew thick, and the ground trembled as if the earth's heart were trying to draw something from deep beneath the surface. It was calling something forth, some power long buried. And then, in the stillness, she saw it. A crack appeared in the earth in front of her, jagged and wide. From within it, a dark, pulsing light began to emerge, something alive, something ancient. It writhed, thrashing as it pushed its way to the surface. Elena could feel its pull, like a magnetic force that drew at her very core. "No!" Elena whispered, her body trembling. "I can't." The light erupted from the earth in a violent explosion, revealing a shape she could barely comprehend. A mass of writhing tendrils, dark and slick, covered in scales that shimmered like oil. It was a creature born of the earth itself, its form an amalgamation of roots and stone, its eyes burning with an unholy fire. Its tendrils reached toward her, as if it recognized her, understood her as a part of the earth's hunger. Elena felt her body betray her again. Her chest constricted with an unbearable pressure, and she collapsed to the ground, her vision blurring. "Help me," the creature hissed, its voice a rasping whisper. It spoke in a language that seemed to bypass her mind, speaking directly to her very soul. "You are the one who will feed me. You are the one who will bring me forth." The words washed over Elena like a wave, and the hunger inside her responded with a violent surge, a gnawing need that twisted her insides. She could feel it, the power that had been dormant, locked beneath the earth. It had waited for her, chosen her, and now it was rising. The hunger consumed her mind, drowning out every thought except for one: feeding the creature, feeding the earth. Her hands shot out, instinctively grasping at the ground, her nails scraping against the soil as she tried to stop herself, tried to hold on to her last shred of control. But there was no stopping it. She could feel the creature's tendrils brush against her skin, its cold, damp touch sending a jolt of dark energy through her. It coiled around her, pulling her toward it, feeding off her fear, feeding off her resistance. "No!" Elena screamed, her voice raw. She fought against the pull, but it was too strong, too overwhelming. "I won't." But the words died in her throat as the hunger surged to a deafening crescendo. The earth beneath her cracked open again, and she could feel it, a connection, a deep, bone-shattering bond between her and the land. The hunger, the creature, it was all the same. It was inside her. It had always been inside her. And now, it was too late to escape. The creature's form shifted, its tendrils writhing in rhythm with the pulsing energy of the earth. Elena felt the hunger flare, a fire that burned through her, consuming everything in its path. She was drowning in it, her thoughts, her identity, everything she had once been. It was all fading, consumed by the pull of the earth's heart. "You are mine," the creature hissed again, its voice blending with the rumbling growl of the earth's heart. "You have awakened me. Now you will feed me." Elena's vision swam as the world around her distorted, bending to the will of the hunger. The earth, the creature, the power that surged within her, they were all one, and she was powerless to stop it. She could feel herself slipping away, her will eroding as the hunger took root, carving itself deeper and deeper into her soul. The land's hunger had been a shadow at first, a whisper in the dark. But now it was everything. Her mind screamed in defiance, but her body had already answered the call. The earth had claimed her, and there was no going back. The darkness inside Elena had become overwhelming. She could no longer distinguish where her mind ended and the hunger began. It was like an all-consuming fire that had claimed every part of her, reducing her to nothing but a vessel for the earth's insatiable thirst. She could feel the creature wrapping itself around her thoughts, feeding on her resistance, until she was no longer certain of who she had once been. Everywhere around her, the land had become alien, twisted and corrupted by the creature's power. The trees had grown into monstrous forms, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The air was thick, heavy with the earth's malice. Even the birds, once so vibrant and full of life, had turned into creatures of darkness, their wings beating the air in an eerie rhythm that felt like a funeral march. But somewhere, deep beneath the layers of hunger and fear, there was a flicker, a thread of something familiar. Elena. It had always been there, buried deep in her heart. The woman who had once loved the earth, who had wanted to heal it, to fix the damage done by the hunger. She had not always been consumed by the darkness. And now, amidst the overwhelming force of the earth's heart, that small flicker of hope was her last chance. In the distance, she could hear the deep, guttural growl of the earth's heart calling her name, its voice vibrating the very bones of the land. It wanted her, needed her. The hunger was its gift, and she was its unwilling disciple. But Elena's resolve surged, born of memories she thought were lost. She could still hear the whispers of the Watcher, the way he had spoken of balance, of finding a way to make things right. She wasn't sure if she could do it, if it was even possible. But one thing was clear. She had to try. With a guttural cry, Elena summoned what little strength remained. She forced her hands into the dirt, the earth beneath her resisting, pushing back. The hunger inside her thrashed, trying to drown out her defiance, but she fought against it. "Enough!" Elena shouted, her voice raw and desperate. "I refuse to be your puppet." For a moment, nothing happened. The land around her was still, as if waiting for her next move. Then the ground trembled. A blinding flash of light erupted from within her chest, flooding her body with a surge of energy. The hunger screamed as it recoiled, the power it had once controlled now slipping from its grasp. The earth's heart howled in rage, its tendrils reaching for her, but Elena pushed back with all her might. "I am not you," she cried. "I am not your tool." The pulse of power inside her grew stronger, the light radiating from her chest like a beacon. The creature, the ancient terror from beneath the earth, screeched in agony as Elena's will pushed it back. It wasn't over yet. She could feel the hunger lashing at her, trying to reclaim its hold. But now Elena understood. She understood the nature of the land's hunger. It wasn't a force of creation. It was a parasite, feeding on the life of everything around it. The Earth's heart had twisted the balance, turning the world into a realm of endless hunger. But Elena now knew the truth. Hunger could be stopped. We could end it. Her chest burned with the effort, but she fought through the pain, focusing every ounce of her strength on the pulse of power that emanated from her heart. The Earth's heart trembled, and for the first time since it had emerged, there was a flicker of fear in its molten eyes. "You cannot destroy me." The Earth's heart rumbled. "I can." Elena spat, her voice filled with conviction. "I will." The light within her expanded, tearing through the hunger and the darkness. The land around her screamed in agony as the roots of the earth began to unravel, as if her will was undoing everything the Earth's heart had created. And then, with one final surge, Elena's pulse of power exploded outward, flooding the land with light. When Elena opened her eyes, she was lying on the ground, her body aching as if she had been torn apart and put back together. The hunger was gone, and the oppressive weight of the Earth's heart had lifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence. No voices, no rumbling, no hunger. The land around her had changed. The twisted trees had begun to return to their natural state, their branches growing tall and strong. The ground felt softer, warmer, as if the earth itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The birds that once seemed so dark and menacing were now flying overhead, their wings cutting through the air in joyous patterns. Elena sat up slowly, her heart still racing, her body trembling. She wasn't sure if what had just happened was real. Had she really destroyed the Earth's heart? Had she finally freed herself and the land from its curse? A figure appeared in the distance, emerging from the trees. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the familiar silhouette. It was the Watcher. He walked toward her, his expression unreadable. His gaze fell on her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Elena was still recovering from the ordeal, her mind struggling to process everything. Finally, the Watcher spoke, his voice soft but firm. "You did it." Elena nodded weakly. "I didn't know if I could, but I couldn't let the hunger consume everything. Not again." He offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. "You've saved this place," he said, "and in doing so, you've saved yourself." Elena's gaze drifted across the land, her heart swelling with a bittersweet feeling. The hunger was gone. The Earth's heart had been stopped, but she knew that the world would never be the same again, and neither would she. "Do you think it will stay this way?" she asked softly, her voice distant. The Watcher looked up at the sky, as if pondering the question. "Perhaps, or perhaps this is just the beginning. The land will heal, but it will take time. And you, Elena, you will have to live with the choices you've made. But you will never be alone. Not now." The two of them stood there in the quiet, watching the sun set on a world that had been saved, yet was forever changed. The hunger was gone, but Elena knew the land would never forget the darkness that had once claimed it. And neither would she. In the final moments of her journey, Elena overcame the pull of the Earth's heart, vanquishing the hunger that had taken root in her and in the land. She had broken the cycle, but in doing so, she had to confront the darkness within herself. The Earth, now free from the grip of hunger, would heal, and so would she. But Elena knew one thing for certain. True healing would take time. And time, in the world of the Earth, was something she had just begun to understand.